Country A has 3 notorious delinquent high schools, each with a terrible reputation. Among them, the most infamous is Jiangshan High School. Here, multi-generational biker gangs have long run rampant across the country. Nearly every student on campus smokes, and documented incidents of violence number in the hundreds each year. Calling it the worst den of evil in the 21st century is no exaggeration at all. But not long ago, this place that struck fear into everyone's hearts completely changed. It was taken over by me, Gushila, a first-year girl. But the peace didn't last long before troublemakers started showing up one after another. The most frequent offenders were from Daosang High School. They kept mocking me for being a girl in charge, saying Jiangshan High School should rename itself a girls' school. Today, my right-hand man, Bai Jungshu, known as the informant, was called out by them again. Not long ago, these people didn't even have the guts to look Jiangshan High School in the eye. Their arrogance now just means they haven't seen what I'm truly capable of. So I decided to step in myself and teach them a lesson they'd never forget. By then, Bai Jungshu's eyes were already burning with fury, ready to throw the first punch. The buzzcut guy from Daocheng had their fists clenched too, ready to strike back at any moment. That's when I walked over, stifling a yawn, heading straight to the space between the two of them. The buzzcut guy frowned, sizing me up as an uninvited guest. I glanced over at him and announced that I was the boss of Jiangshan High School. If they had a problem with that, they were welcome to try their luck. Bai Jungshu quickly stepped half a pace forward, lowering his voice to warn me it wasn't worth getting personally involved in this mess. Before he could finish, a bowl-cut guy reached out and draped his hand over my shoulder, sneering that a little girl like me had some nerve putting on a show. I spun around and threw a punch, sending him flying through the air. The force was so great he sailed several meters before hitting the ground. I snapped at him. Which animal thought it was okay to put his pig trotters on my shoulder? Was he tired of living? Another buzz cut nearby saw what happened and lunged at me with his fist raised. He was yelling the whole time, calling me a crazy BT chach over and over. I raised my hand and caught his punch head on without flinching, then hit him right back in the face with my other fist. Time to show him what a real crazy BT chach looks like. I swept my eyes over the group of Daosheng guys in front of me. I'd long heard they'd been talking trash behind my back. Since they came looking for trouble, I told them not to waste time and to all come at me at once. Bai Jungshu simply walked to the side and sat down, unwrapped a lollipop and popped it in his mouth, shaking his head with a helpless sigh. I knew exactly what was on his mind. He just didn't want me to come in person. After all, the moment I get involved, the guys under me never get a chance to throw a single punch. The dull thud of fists hitting flesh was so loud it was unmistakable. Mixed in with it came the crisp snap of breaking bones. Someone groaned and coughed up blood, the sounds weaving together with the thuds and cracks from before. The scene was pure chaos, but the outcome was never in doubt. It was a total one-sided beatdown. The truth was, taking over a school as notorious as Jiangshan High, as a girl no less, came down to one simple reason: I was strong enough. I spat out a splash of blood that had hit the corner of my mouth and looked down at the crowd writhing on the ground, sneering that these pathetic weaklings had some nerve acting tough in front of me. The guys around me erupted in cheers, and Bai Jungshu came up and slung his arm around my shoulder, laying on the admiration thick. Nearby, my best friend, Jiang Jixu, watched from the sidelines with her phone, her expression making it clear she thought the Daosheng guys were pretty dumb. Bai Jungshu's eyes turned cold and calculating as he looked over the downed Daosheng guys, suggesting we storm Daosheng High School and make sure they never pulled this again. I told him to handle it however he saw fit, then shot a cold look at the hand he'd put on my shoulder and gestured for him to move it. Bai Jungshu pulled his hand back immediately, stumbling over an apology. I couldn't be bothered to make a big deal of it, just told him flatly to quit talking and get the bike started. And with that, our crew set off in a thundering convoy on their motorbikes. Every car on the road moved out of the way without being asked. After all, the biker gang's reputation preceded them. No one dared mess with them. I fell asleep on the way, and the two guys behind me took the chance to chat quietly. The one in front was still buzzing about the scene earlier, raving about how incredible I was. The one behind had a look of total infatuation on his face, going on about how I was both cool and hot, and even thinking about trying to flirt with me. The guy in front of him didn't hold back in criticizing him for being in heat and advised him to wake up if he wanted to live. Then he lowered his voice and said that someone like me, a monster basically, would never waste time on something as pointless as romance. I actually heard every word of that, and it inexplicably brought back a memory I'd kept buried for 6 years. Back when I was young, with the reckless boldness that only youth could give, I worked up the courage to confess my feelings to my first love, Lee Seo-jun, only to be gently turned down. At the time, Lee Seo-jun was a first-year college student. Our family ran a homestay back then, and he was the older brother who had been boarding with us. The reason I fell for him was about as simple and pure as it gets. He was genuinely, breathtakingly handsome, the kind you couldn't look away from. I was always coming up with new excuses to bring him whichever fruits he liked. Every time, he'd accept them with a smile and a warm thank you. Every time I heard his gentle voice, I had to stop myself from screaming with joy on the inside. I remember one night when we were talking together out on the rooftop terrace. I was sneaking glances at his beautiful profile, completely smitten, while he thoughtfully draped his jacket over my shoulders, worried I'd catch a cold in the night air. At first, it was his looks that drew me in, but over time, I found myself falling deeper into his gentleness. How I wished those happy moments could have gone on forever. But the separation came without any warning. One day, my father walked over holding an envelope and said Lee Seo-jun had asked him to pass it to me. He told me Lee Seo-jun had gone to serve in the military and relayed his apology, that he was sorry he hadn't been able to say goodbye in person before leaving. My father patted my head and gave me one of his wise man speeches, saying that life was nothing but a series of meetings and farewells, and telling me not to be too sad. Sad was inevitable, but there was nothing I could do about it. When it came down to it, Lee Seo-jun was just taken away by the country like that. By the time I got back to school, a crowd had gathered around an arm wrestling match. Someone was hollering encouragement at the top of their lungs, while someone else was trash-talking that the loser would have to get a vasectomy. The winner was laughing smugly, mocking his opponent for being weak. The loser was fuming with humiliation, glaring daggers. The argument escalated instantly, and the two of them were at each other's throats in seconds. The classroom, already loud, descended into complete chaos. A female classmate watching the mess muttered that they were acting like monkeys. Jung Jixu, who had already come in early, curled her lip and fired back dryly that even monkeys would find that insulting. Just then I pushed open the door and walked in, frowning at the noise. The moment those words landed, everyone scrambled to get back to their seats. The classroom that had been a riot 1 second before went dead silent the next. Without even looking up, I just said I was going to sleep and put my head down on the desk, and warned them that anyone who dared make a sound was signing their own death warrant. I also reminded my seatmate to wake me up when lunch was ready. But the quiet didn't last long before the homeroom teacher came through the door. He announced that a student teacher would be starting at the school today. Before the words were even fully out, the student teacher had walked up to the front and started his self-introduction. Meanwhile, down in the seats, I was already out cold, completely unfazed. The guys grumbled that the student teacher looked like a pretty boy, the kind that rubbed them the wrong way. The girls, on the other hand, were instantly love-struck, their eyes glued to him. After the homeroom teacher left, the student teacher picked up the roll sheet with a smile, saying he'd like to get to know everyone through attendance. No one dared make noise and disturb my sleep, so they cooperated with the roll call without complaint. He went through the names one by one in a gentle voice, even complimenting everyone on having lovely names. After a brief pause, he called out the next name, but I was sleeping soundly, and nobody dared go up and wake me to answer. When no one responded for a while, he called my name again, wondering aloud if I had come. The repeated calls eventually pulled me out of my sleep, and I frowned, trying to figure out who was bothering me. I lifted my head, thoroughly annoyed, and Lee Seo-jun's familiar face slammed straight into my memory. My pupils shrank, and a storm erupted inside me, stirring up those buried memories once again. Back then, I would always call him Appa in a sweet voice and chase after him with all sorts of curious questions about his day. Curious why he always had his nose in a book. Didn't he ever get bored? He'd just shake his head with a smile and say, with complete sincerity, that he wasn't bored at all, because his dream was to become a cool teacher one day. And standing there now, he looked exactly like the person he had always dreamed of becoming. I shot to my feet, my voice trembling in a way I couldn't hide, and called out Appa, then immediately frowned and demanded to know how he, the guy who had vanished into the army without a word, had ended up here. Lee Seo-jun's face was full of apology as he leaned close and quietly suggested they talk after class. I opened my mouth in surprise but couldn't find the words. My cheeks were burning completely against my will. I was actually blushing out of nowhere. But the next second, the bowl cut guy appeared behind Lee Seo-jun, eyes blazing with menace, saying how dare anyone mess with our boss. He grabbed Lee Seo-jun by the collar with one hand, spat on the ground and called him a pretty boy, then landed a brutal kick that sent Lee Seo-jun flying a good distance away. The bowl-cut guy sauntered over and stood over Lee Seo-jun, who had crashed to the ground, warning him to keep his head down in the school and not get above himself, making clear that even being a teacher wouldn't earn him any mercy here. Lee Seo-jun pushed himself up, trying to open his mouth and defuse the situation, but the moment he started to speak, the bowl-cut guy grabbed him by the hair and shoved his head back down hard. The bowl-cut guy's eyes turned even colder, barking at him for daring to spout useless nonsense, declaring that in this school, strength was the only rule that mattered. I stepped forward immediately, reaching out to grab the bowl-cut guy by the hair with an iron grip, and sharply ordered him to stop. I forced his head down hard, and asked in an icy tone what exactly he thought he was doing to a teacher. One thought filled my mind. To protect Lee Seo-jun, I had to deal with these problem students myself. The students watching from around the classroom didn't dare breathe, and my thoughts drifted back to that terrifying moment 6 years ago, when a gang of thugs had me completely surrounded, mouthing off about how stubborn I was for a grade schooler, how I'd somehow held out for over an hour. The ringleader spoke with nothing but contempt, demanding I get on my knees and apologize for beating up his little brother. Meanwhile, the little boy I'd hit was egging his brother on, urging him to hit me harder. I let out a short laugh, completely fearless, and told them to bring it, shouting that the kid had it coming for bullying a girl. Why should I apologize for that? The ringleader snapped and stepped forward, fist raised, snarling that I was dead meat today. Just as the punch was about to come down on me, Lee Seo-jun came charging in. The ringleader's fist landed square on Lee Seo-jun's face with full force. Lee Seo-jun struggled to get back on his feet, and pulled me tightly into his arms, shielding me despite the pain. The thugs swarmed him from all sides, raining down blows. That day, my vision blurred in the midst of the relentless beating, but Lee Seo-jun's gentle smile stayed perfectly clear in my heart, never fading. That was the moment he carved out a place in my heart that nothing could move. Coming back to the present, watching Lee Seo-jun getting roughed up right in front of me, the rage inside me shot up like a flame. My grip on the guy's hair tightened without me even realizing it. He howled in pain, screaming that his scalp was about to be torn off. The classmates around whispered to each other, unable to figure out why I had suddenly flown into a rage. But what they could tell for certain was that I was absolutely furious right now, as everyone watched my fist, about to come crashing down on the guy's head. Jang Jixu stepped forward just in time and called out to stop me. She walked up, phone in hand, with a bright smile, breezily explaining that it was a hidden camera prank show. She grinned at Lee Seo-jun, saying they'd totally scared the new teacher. teacher, and the surprise was a big hit. Then she turned to the rest of the class, with a clear warning in her eyes, making it plain that anyone who wanted to keep breathing had better play along. Everyone caught on instantly and rushed to play along, calling it a prank, saying the hidden camera got him good, teasing the student teacher for falling for it completely. Jiang Jixiu led everyone in a round of applause, then walked up to Lee Seojun with a polite welcome. She spun around and shot a look at the bowl-cut guy who still had Lee Seojun by the collar, telling him to let go now. The bowl-cut guy dropped his hands in a panic, sweat breaking out across his forehead, stumbling over one apology after another. He explained he'd gotten too into it and hadn't held back enough, begging the student teacher to forgive him. The whole class held their breath, every eye fixed on me. Everyone was waiting to see how I would react. I naturally wanted to come across well in front of Lee Seojun, so I released my grip on the guy's hair. Going along with the cover story Jiang Jixiu had spun, I smiled and welcomed Lee Seojun, adding that the welcome had been a little rough. Lee Seojun rubbed his sore scalp and smiled, saying everyone's acting was very convincing. The guys in the class finally let out a collective breath, murmuring to each other that they'd nearly been scared to death but had somehow managed to pull it off. After all of that, everyone got the message. The new student teacher was not to be messed with, because I had his back. Cut to the teacher's internship office. The other two new student teachers were slumped over their desks, groaning in despair. The male student teacher looked completely defeated, questioning whether this place was really a high school. The female student teacher looked frazzled, ranting that every single thing she'd seen had given her the creeps. No one in class paid any attention. There were fights and things being smashed everywhere, people smoking and drinking openly. The male student teacher sighed miserably, mumbling that he'd just been robbed in the bathroom. That money was his entire living expenses for the week. The female student teacher covered her face and sobbed, overwhelmed with regret, cursing herself for choosing the wrong school. Just then, Lee Seojun pushed open the door and walked in with a smile. The two student teachers immediately rushed over, firing questions at him all at once, asking if anything had happened. Lee Seojun looked puzzled, asking what they were talking about, saying the students here were pure and kind. He smiled and added that 40 minutes ago, when the homeroom teacher was teaching math, he had specifically gone to observe quietly through the window. Every student was paying careful attention in class, and the atmosphere in the classroom was wonderful. He said with genuine feeling that coming to Jiangshan High School had been exactly the right decision. The two student teachers next to him stared back in total bewilderment, completely at a loss. At the same time, I was walking quickly down the hallway and accidentally bumped into someone coming the other way. The person immediately snapped in annoyance, but after getting a look at my face, quickly fell over themselves to apologize and bolted. I paid no mind and kept thinking about Lee Seojun. Thank goodness the hidden camera story had covered it. Otherwise, what had nearly gone down in that classroom would have been a bloodbath right in front of Lee Seojun. But I still couldn't wrap my head around why he would ever choose to do his internship at a school with such a terrible reputation. I just reached the vending machine when a hand suddenly appeared. I was about to give the person a piece of my mind, but looked up and found myself face to face with Lee Seojun. He guessed exactly what I wanted, cola, and held out the drink with a smile. I followed him to a bench in the schoolyard and sat down, the air between us a little awkward. I spoke first, a hint of accusation in my voice, asking why he'd suddenly gone off to the military back then, and why I could never get through to him. Lee Seojun scratched his head a little awkwardly, and explained that he'd been so buried in his studies, he'd completely forgotten about getting his draft notice. He patiently explained that communication in the army was inconvenient, and after being discharged, he'd been abroad for a while, so he'd never been able to reach out. I couldn't help raising my voice, telling him his excuses were piling up. No matter how busy he was, he could have contacted me at least once. Lee Seojun ruffled my hair and said with complete sincerity that he had missed me too, and in a moment of frustration, I smacked his arm to mask how flustered I was. Passing students watched with a mix of awe and fear, whispering that it was no surprise I was the boss, openly hitting a teacher like that. But inside I was going crazy, telling myself there was no reason to get so worked up. That crush had been 6 years ago, and acting like this was just embarrassing. Lee Seojun rubbed his arm and said with a touch of complaint that it actually kind of hurt. I pulled my hand back awkwardly and quickly apologized, then casually asked if he'd found a place to stay. Lee Seojun nodded and said yes, at my house. He also asked whether my father hadn't mentioned it to me. I stared at him in disbelief, asking if he meant he was going to be staying at my place just like before. Lee Seojun smiled and nodded, saying he planned to board with us during his internship, just like in the old days, politely adding that he hoped we'd look out for each other. And just like that, I began a new chapter of living under the same roof with Lee Seojun after 6 years apart. Back home, I found my father lounging on the couch watching a wrestling match, perfectly at ease. He used to be a professional wrestler, with a legendary record that earned him a reputation as an undefeated myth. Now retired, he spent his days watching matches on TV and commenting on everything with feeling. My father looked up when I walked in and asked why I was home so late. He said he was starving and told me to hurry up and make dinner. With nowhere else to put my frustration, I threw my father over my shoulder onto the floor and demanded to know how he could possibly think about eating. After all, Lee Seojun was coming to stay stay with us, and he hadn't breathed a single word about it, leaving me completely blindsided. That evening, Lee Seo-jun and I came up to the rooftop terrace together, just like we used to. I looked up at the night sky and quickly explained I wasn't unhappy about him being here. Lee Seo-jun smiled and said he knew, and remarked that my dad and I were as close as ever. He turned to look at the city lights in the distance, his voice full of nostalgia, saying it was just as beautiful as before. I said quietly that I was glad we had met again, and congratulated him on living out his dream of becoming a teacher. Lee Seo-jun smiled and corrected me. He was technically just a student teacher for now. I pushed back right away, saying that a student teacher was still a teacher. Lee Seo-jun's eyes softened with warmth as he thanked me quietly, every bit as gentle as I remembered. He also apologized for disappearing back then and causing me to worry, and promised he would never leave without a word again. I hesitated for a moment, but the question in my heart finally came out. I wanted to know why he had chosen Jiangshan High School of all places for his internship. He explained that to pass the teacher certification exam, he had to complete the internship first. Getting familiar with how to connect with students early would lay the groundwork for his career going forward. I pressed further and asked again why specifically Jiangshan High School. He said it was because he had missed the ideal window to apply. He'd been turned down by several schools before Jiangshan High School agreed right away. He paused and added that this internship was especially important to him. If he didn't complete it successfully, he'd have to give up his dream of becoming a teacher. His parents had always been firmly against it. I was instantly infuriated. That made no sense at all. He'd worked so hard. How could he give up his dream over something like that? Lee Seo-jun reached over and gently patted my head, smiling and telling me not to worry. He said he was absolutely going to work hard and become a cool teacher, and that he felt lucky to have chosen the right school, so everything would be fine. Inside, I let out a quiet sigh. Reality was nothing like the rosy picture he was painting. He'd probably been so buried in his books that he had no idea what this school was actually like. Our school had a notorious reputation. It wouldn't be ranked as the worst of the 3 delinquent schools for nothing. But with me here, I would absolutely make sure he got through his internship in one piece. His dream of becoming a cool teacher, I would be the one to protect it. The next morning, when Lee Seo-jun came downstairs, he didn't see me anywhere, and quietly thought to himself how diligent students were these days. Meanwhile, I had already gathered the entire school the moment dawn broke. The school courtyard was packed with students, all huddled together grumbling, but no matter how full of complaints they were, not a single one dared resist, because this was an order from me, their boss. I stood before the crowd, sweeping my gaze across the unruly mass of students. I thought to myself, Jiangshan High School was already a thoroughly notorious delinquent school. The odds of anyone getting through an internship here without being disturbed were essentially zero. But for the sake of protecting Lee Seo-jun's dream, I had to defy the odds and reshape this school. Even if it cost me everything, I would not let his dream of becoming a teacher be buried in this mess. I cleared my throat and turned utterly serious, formally declaring a new set of rules to everyone present. For the next 4 weeks, no fighting, no drinking or smoking, no swearing, no public urination. Any behavior unfit for a student was strictly prohibited. The moment the order landed, some students started grumbling in protest. More than a few tried to keep their defiant edge, demanding to know who I thought I was to forbid them from all of that. Others even insisted that rules had never applied to them. A deafening crash cut through the commotion. I drove my fist into the wall beside me, and the entire section crumbled to pieces. The students who had just been mouthing off flinched hard at the force of it. There was no point trying any other tactic with this crowd. Only absolute overwhelming force would keep them in line. I made it clear, in a tone that left no room for argument, that anyone who had a problem could step forward. My cold gaze swept the room, and not a single person dared meet my eyes. I pressed further, adding in a heavier tone that anyone with any complaint had better speak up right now. Then I threw another punch into the wall as a warning. Silently I told myself, anyone who stood in the way of my first love had only one fate. A wave of murmuring swept through the crowd, people whispering about how I'd suddenly snapped, wondering if I was on something, asking what had gotten into me out of nowhere. A shaved head guy sidled up to Bai Jungshu, completely baffled, asking if he had any idea what was going on with me, since he was the closest one to me. Bai Jungshu pulled the lollipop out of his mouth, frowned and shook his head. He had no clue. He was just as baffled as everyone else about why I was trying to turn this place into a model school. It made absolutely no sense. Seeing that no one dared speak up, I ordered all smokers to put out their cigarettes on the spot and assigned students to split up and clean the campus, and made clear that I would be watching their every move, so they had better not slip up. At the same time, out at the school gates, Lee Seo-jun spotted the other 2 student teachers coming. He waved at them with a smile. Once they'd walked up, Lee Seo-jun asked why they both looked so terrible. The male student teacher let out a weary sigh and admitted he didn't want to come to this awful school. The female student teacher had her head hanging low, looking haggard, saying she was scared to face the students, so terrified she hadn't slept a wink all night. But Lee Seo-jun smiled and told them to relax. The students here were very kind, and they were probably just mistaken. The female student teacher pushed back immediately, saying this was a school with a terrible reputation that had been on the news more than once, implying that the one with the mistaken impression was Lee Seo-jun, who was being fooled by appearances. classes. After they went inside, the female student teacher noticed a student licking a bottle and immediately pointed it out to Lee Seo-jun. She said this proved her point. The students were terrifying. Looking at things now, that bottle would probably end up being thrown at a teacher's head. Lee Seo-jun thought there must be a misunderstanding and approached the student with a calm, gentle question about what they were doing. That student was the former top dog of the third years, a guy nicknamed Lion King, Lin Minsheng. He respectfully answered that they were cleaning the campus, then glanced back at his classmates with a look. Everyone immediately stood to attention, bowing in unison to greet the teachers. The sudden display of perfect manners left the other two student teachers frozen in place, completely stunned. Meanwhile, I stood on the floor above, looking down at the scene below, a satisfied smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Lee Seo-jun laughed and said he had told them all along. The students were perfectly kind and well behaved. The students strained to keep straight faces, thinking desperately to themselves that they had to hold it together and not blow their cover. I turned and walked back down the corridor, catching all kinds of small sounds drifting out of the classroom. The guys were all fidgeting in their own ways, some picking at their teeth, some bouncing their legs non-stop, others chewing on their pens and sighing. More than a few were complaining about how uncomfortable they felt, saying they were craving nicotine. Someone immediately snapped back and called that person an idiot, saying their brain must be broken. If I caught them, they were dead. Someone else agreed that even if smoking was banned, at least they should be allowed to fight to let off steam. They were going stir crazy. Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore and said the withdrawal was getting serious. Things were going to get ugly if this kept up. A few of them got on board at once, but had barely taken a step when they suddenly froze. The bowl cut guy sniffed the air and asked what that smell was. I followed their eyes and spotted a few people hiding in a corner not far below, smoking. Someone exclaimed that those guys had guts, openly smoking right under my ban. The bowl cut guy, drawn in by the scent of smoke, licked his lips and started pulling his buddy along to go get a puff. I appeared behind them without warning, my voice cold as ice, asking what they were thinking of going for. I shoved aside the male classmate blocking my way, and without another word jumped straight out the window. The smokers downstairs were lost in a haze, completely unaware of the danger coming their way. I let out a cold laugh and asked them how nicotine was treating them, mocking those brainless goldfish for daring to treat my rules like background noise. The moment they recognized me, the color drained from their faces, every single one of them scrambling to beg for mercy. I showed them no kindness, and the sounds of wailing filled the air almost immediately. In no time at all, I had flattened every last one of the smokers. At that point, Bai Jungshu came running over after hearing what happened. Looking at the groaning figures on the ground, he frowned and told me I'd gone too far, telling me to know when to stop before the school turned into a hospital. He pointed out that these guys had been smoking for years, then looked at me in genuine confusion, asking why I had suddenly decided to change this school. I gave a short scoff and simply said it was the student code of conduct. Bai Jungshu sighed, pointing out that I'd been in a brawl just yesterday and had the nerve to talk about that. Bai Jungshu kept pushing, warning that everyone was seething, things could spiral out of control at this rate, and that it was just smoking, no need to make such a big deal of it. Bai Jungshu was the only one in the whole school who would talk to me like that, a privilege I'd silently granted him. We were close, so someone had clearly asked him to come probe me, but I had no desire to explain myself. I just told him flatly that even if they weren't happy, they could deal with it. As for the real reason, I glanced over and spotted Lee Seo-jun not far away. There he was, going about his day as a student teacher without a care in the world. That was all the reason I needed. Bai Jungshu was still nagging away at my ear, pushing for an explanation, saying at the very least they needed a reason everyone could accept. I kept my eyes fixed on Lee Seo-jun, falling into a daze, and said the same thing as always. If they weren't happy, they were welcome to try taking over as boss themselves. Up on the rooftop, a crowd of students had gathered. Yin Zhengqiu, the former second-year boss known as Huang Baju, was raging that he'd had enough. He said before Gushila had unified Jiangshan High School he had been untouchable, now he was shackled by rules and none of his old swagger was left. If it weren't for Gushila, each of the 3 years would have had their own boss, each ruling their own turf. Choi Dong-hyun, who had almost become the first-year boss back then, rushed over to calm Yin Zhengqiu down, but Yin Zhengqiu was beyond calming down, cursing that calling me a dictator was one thing, but what gave me the right to unilaterally change the entire school. Choi Dong-hyun lowered his voice and shared his theory, that all of this was likely connected to the new student teacher. He added that rumors were going around that I not only knew the student teacher, but was actually quite close to him, and that I normally didn't bother with school affairs at all. This sudden change in behavior was looking more and more connected to that student teacher, no matter how you looked at it. Yin Zhengqiu exploded with rage at that, cursing me for being out of my mind, forcing the entire school of Jiangshan High to suffer through all of this just for one student teacher. He slumped with a heavy sigh, saying things would be different if Lu Yingshua were here. If Lu Yingshua had been around, I never could have united the school in the first place. At that, the former third-year boss, Lin Minsheng, spoke up. He said it was pointless to bring up Lu Yingshua now, he was still in juvenile detention, with no telling when he'd get out. For now, they needed to focus on what they could actually do, and that was to stage a coup. The students listening immediately stirred with excitement. Many were torn, tempted to break free but wary of my authority. Even Yin Zhengqiu was caught off guard, repeating the word coup with a stunned look on his face. Lin Minsheng pulled a cigarette out of his pocket and rattled off the new rules one by one, voice dripping with contempt, saying this place was starting to feel like a finishing school. Then he suddenly raised his voice and blasted everyone for being idiots. Time to wake up, telling them not to naively think that holding out for a month would see them through what felt like hell. He challenged them. Did mindlessly going along with my stubbornness not make them feel pathetic? He lit the cigarette and kept stoking the crowd, saying that as long as I wasn't removed, nothing would go back to the way it was. Lin Minsheng declared that if they joined forces to bring me down, they could smoke and fight to their heart's content and reclaim the life they used to have. Someone immediately rallied to the cause, pointing out there was no reason to put up with this. They outnumbered me. There was no need to fear one girl. Lin Minsheng let out a scornful laugh, mocking the idea that a girl was the boss of Jiangshan High. It was embarrassing enough on its own. He called on everyone to light the fire of revolution and rise up against my rule. The resentment that had been building in the crowd ignited all at once, all of it aimed at Gu Shila. The rooftop was boiling over. Yin Zhengqiu and Choi Donghyun both thrust their fists into the air, declaring it was time for a change of power and to reclaim their Jiangshan High School. Lin Minsheng raised his fist high and shouted that the coup had begun, the roar of the crowd loud enough to ring in your ears. Just at that moment, I climbed the stairs one step at a time up to the rooftop. I raised my foot and gave the locked rooftop door a brutal kick. Several thunderous bangs. The door burst open and sent the students standing in front of it flying. Everyone on the rooftop froze. The charged atmosphere cut short in an instant. I swept the room with an icy stare, and just as before, not a single person dared meet my gaze. I spoke slowly and deliberately, pointing out that I had just laid down the rules this very morning. No smoking on school grounds. Absolutely no exceptions. And yet not only had they treated my rules as if they didn't exist, they had the audacity to act out and stage an open coup. I spoke with cool contempt, saying, so what if over 1,000 students at the school were unhappy? If anyone had what it took, they were welcome to come try their luck and see who would be left standing. At those words, Lin Minsheng's expression changed instantly. He muttered a curse under his breath, wondering how I'd suddenly appeared. It took a good moment before he forced the panic off his face. Once he'd steadied himself, he turned to reassure the crowd, telling everyone not to be afraid. He stepped to the front and, emboldened by the numbers behind him, threw down a challenge. Trying to sound brave, he declared that this would be my burial ground. He even announced that starting right now, he would carry out my execution. The crowd began to echo him, thrusting their fists in the air. Then they surged forward toward me in a wave, shouting about bringing down my iron grip once and for all. Lin Minsheng charged at the front, screaming as he threw the first so-called fist of revolution. I reached out and grabbed his fist mid-swing, stared at him with cold eyes and remarked dryly that he sure had the nerve, then swung my right fist and sent him flying. Lin Minsheng's whole body reeled from the impact, as if he'd been struck by a sledgehammer. After hitting the ground, he could only curse me inwardly as a monster, because deep down, Lin Minsheng knew he had zero chance against me one-on-one. So he tried to rally everyone to bring down my tyranny together. Pushing through his fear, he urged them to charge all at once. Strength in numbers, he said. But the people around him shrank back one by one, not a single one daring to step forward, especially the moment they watched him get sent flying by me a second time. Every last one of them lost their nerve in an instant. Seeing this, Lin Minsheng swore at them for falling apart and ruining his whole plan. Did they not understand the basic principle of taking out the leader first? I walked up to Lin Minsheng and warned him through gritted teeth that if he ever stirred up trouble again, he'd be in a far worse state than this. Lin Minsheng was shaking all over from the beating. Without even the courage to talk back, he could only bow his head in humiliation and keep his mouth shut. On the other side, Choi Donghyun grabbed Yin Jingqiu, and the two of them quietly inched backward in the chaos, trying to slip away. I barked at them to stop right there, called them out for reeking of trouble from head to toe, and demanded to know where they thought they were sneaking off to, and ordered every single one of them to stay put and reflect on themselves. After dealing with the rooftop situation, I made my way to the teacher's internship office. Lee Seo-jun walked out the door and immediately spotted me, looking puzzled about why I hadn't gone home yet. I pushed down the storm inside me and greeted him with a smile, saying I'd been waiting for him to finish up so we could head home together. Lee Seo-jun smiled and came over. On the way, I asked how his day at school had been. Lee Seo-jun answered in a relaxed tone, warmth in his eyes, saying the school had a great atmosphere and the students were all very friendly. Watching him like that, my face suddenly went hot. I quickly looked down to hide how flustered I was. I said softly that was great, while my heart was hammering out of control. Sure, his smile was genuinely nice, but getting this worked up over it was just embarrassing. Lee Seo-jun seemed to notice something was off, turning to look at me with a gentle, amused smile in his eyes. I smiled to cover the awkwardness, telling myself that all the troublemakers had been dealt with, so things should stay quiet for a while. On the other side, Lin Minsheng was fuming, calling everyone a bunch of cowards. Yin Jingqiu shot him a cold glance and calmly poured cold water on things, saying that a revolution needed someone at the core. Lin Minsheng simply didn't have what it took to stand up against me. Besides, the moment their frontman got knocked away in one punch, no one in their right mind would rush forward. Lin Minsheng muttered bitterly about the coup failing, then turned restless and complained about how long they'd have to be around before the smell of cigarette smoke finally cleared from the air. The next day, I stood to the side supervising students as they cleaned the campus, telling them to take it seriously. They were to make sure everything was spotless before going back inside. No half-hearted effort. Lin Minsheng swept the ground with gritted teeth, muttering under his breath that I was pure evil. Yin Zhengqiu sighed, grumbling that I just stood around ordering people without lifting a finger myself. He told Lin Minsheng to hurry up and finish so they could head in. No point making things harder on himself. Just then, a motorbike roared in out of nowhere, shattering the quiet. The rider impatiently shouted for everyone to move. When one student didn't get out of the way fast enough, he simply launched the bike into the air and flew straight over. Lin Minsheng and Yin Zhengqiu both froze. Yin Zhengqiu was about to step up and give this arrogant guy a piece of his mind, but Lin Minsheng grabbed his arm and stopped him. Lin Minsheng snapped at him for being blind. How could he not recognize Lu Yingshuo? The two of them quickly hurried over and respectfully called out to the rider, Lu Yingshuo. Lin Minsheng asked with a confused look how Lu Yingshuo had gotten out of the juvenile detention center early. Lu Yingshuo shrugged and said casually that he'd been released on parole. He looked around puzzled by the change in the school's atmosphere, saying the nicotine and alcohol levels in the air were ridiculously low. He glanced over at the students doing cleanup, then noticed Lin Minsheng's bruised and battered face, and his brow immediately furrowed. Lin Minsheng quickly stepped forward and filled Lu Yingshuo in on everything that had happened at the school while he was away. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, I was arm wrestling with Bai Jungxiu. Bai Jungxiu rubbed his aching wrist, shaking his head in disbelief at my strength. I scoffed and told him he still had a long way to go. He was nowhere near my level. Then ordered him, loser buys the drinks, and he'd better be back before the bell. Bai Jungxiu sighed with resignation, mumbling under his breath that my manners must have gotten absorbed by my muscles. Walking out of the classroom, he spotted Lu Yingshuo strutting down the hallway with a crowd in tow, but he didn't think much of it, figuring it was something I could handle without breaking a sweat. So he put it out of his mind for now and went to carry out my order to buy drinks. But the moment he left, Lu Yingshuo shoved the classroom door open. His eyes swept the room fast and locked straight on me. Then he turned to Lin Minsheng beside him to confirm that I was the one who had turned the school into this. Lin Minsheng quickly nodded along, then quietly reminded Lu Yingshuo about the no smoking rule on campus. I sensed something was off and turned to look, just in time to watch Lu Yingshuo send Lin Minsheng flying with a single punch. Then I heard Lu Yingshuo say that someone actually dared to give him grief about smoking, then lit a cigarette without a care in the world, puffing away as if no one else existed. I immediately got to my feet, walked up to him and sharply ordered him to put it out, but Lu Yingshuo didn't put it out. Instead, he blew a smoke ring right in my face, the sheer arrogance of it unreal. Yin Jingqiu watched the standoff with growing unease, while Lin Minsheng told him to relax and enjoy the show. Just wait for Lu Yingshuo to put the current boss in her place. Lu Yingshuo's eyes went cold, furiously telling me I had crossed a line and demanding I show respect to my senior. I was so livid I almost laughed and asked if he'd lost his mind. With that, I clenched my fist and swung straight at Lu Yingshuo. Everyone around them sucked in a sharp breath, but the punch never landed. He moved fast and clean, reaching out and clamping down on my fist before it could connect, locking me in place, then leaned in slightly, looking down at me with pure dominance. The pressure radiating off him closed in from all sides, and the sheer force of his grip left me unable to move. Then suddenly, Lu Yingshuo curved his lips and said in a teasing tone that my stubbornness was kind of cute. Just then the bell rang, and Bai Jungshu came back with the snacks he'd bought. Strolling down the hallway, casually sipping his bubble tea, he turned and saw a crowd gathered at the classroom door, so Bai Jungshu quickly pushed through to see what was going on. When he got a clear view of the standoff inside, he choked and spat out a mouthful of bubble tea. Classmates buzzed with disbelief, stunned that someone actually dared flirt with Gushila, and even more stunned that someone had managed to stop her punch. Lu Yingshuo completely ignored the chatter around him. His burning gaze locked on me and wouldn't let go. He made his interest plain, saying in a loaded voice that he liked me, even spelling out that the statement had more than one meaning. I was seething. I wrenched my hand away from him and told him to save his nonsense and get lost. At that moment, Lee Seojun's voice came from the doorway. I immediately froze mid-swing. Terrified he'd see what was happening, I forced down my anger and pushed out a smile, quickly explaining that he shouldn't misread the situation. We were just messing around. Lu Yingshuo stared in bewilderment at my instant mood switch, pausing a beat before it clicked. So this was the student-teacher Lin Minsheng had said I was completely gone over, this pretty-faced guy right in front of him. I turned and shot Lu Yingshuo a venomous glare, dropping my voice to just below a whisper so only the two of us could hear, telling him to meet me on the rooftop after school. We'd settle things properly then, and I was absolutely going to make him pay. Lu Yingshuo raised an eyebrow, tone as brazen as ever but now laced with amusement, calling me fiery. Lu Yingshuo even said outright that he intended to claim me, doubling down on the rooftop meeting, and before leaving had the nerve to call me cutie. I was shaking with rage, barely stopping myself from going after him right then and there. Lu Yingshuo walked out of the classroom and looked down at his hand, his palm already red and throbbing. Red and throbbing, yet the corner of his mouth curled into a smile for no particular reason. He thought I was a girl with real character, not only fierce, but hiding a strength far beyond what anyone would expect. Lin Minsheng immediately sidled up, laying on the flattery, saying Lu Yingshuo was just as formidable as ever. Lu Yingshuo glanced at him and said that Lin Minsheng was right. I was impressive, the current boss for a reason. Then after a pause, Lu Yingshuo added with a note of obsession in his voice that someone like Gushila would be very interesting to have. But first, he'd need to get rid of that inconvenient obstacle. Back in the classroom, Bai Jungshu came in, checked that I was okay, then handed over the snacks and drinks I liked, but I was still stewing, and crushed the cola can in my grip without thinking. I hissed through gritted teeth, wondering what that strawberry head was playing at. I wanted to squeeze him into strawberry juice just to take the edge off. Bai Jungshu was hopping with alarm, leaning in and repeating urgently that the guy was Lu Yingshuo. When I didn't react much, he rushed to add that Lu Yingshuo was a legend in genre Zhongshan High School's biker gang. Then Bai Jungsu launched into the story behind Lu Yingshuo's nickname, Lu Bu. First, because his fighting ability was on a completely different level from everyone else. Virtually no one in any high school across the country could hold their own against him. Second, he owned a heavily modified expensive motorcycle, known as his Red Hair. Then Bai Jungshu told the story of how Lu Yingshuo and the Red Hair became legendary. One time, Lu Yingshuo was just wandering down the street when he happened to notice a group of thugs gathered around a flashy motorcycle, all arguing over it. Something clicked in him, and he walked right up, alone, and flatly told them to hand the bike over. The original owner looked at him like he was out of his mind, calling him a delusional lunatic, and flatly refused to give up his prized bike. But Lu Yingshuo didn't flinch. He squared up like he was perfectly ready to take it by force. The thugs standing around burst out laughing, calling him suicidal, egging each other on. The original owner was furious, ordering his crew to teach this arrogant fool a lesson. The whole group grabbed whatever was nearby and came at Lu Yingshuo, but Lu Yingshuo handled it effortlessly and seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself. He even taunted them to resist as hard as they could, saying winning that way was more satisfying. That day, he went up single-handedly against over 30 armed thugs, not only beat every single one of them clean, but walked away with the bike, and gave the Red Hair its true owner. The defeated original owner lay on the ground sobbing over his motorcycle. Lu Yingshuo casually planted his foot on the man's head, and stated in no uncertain terms that it was now his Red Hair. Bai Jungshu summed it up: overwhelming force and an obsessive need to possess were what Lu Yingshuo was all about. He looked at me with concern after finishing, saying he'd thought Lu Yingshuo was still in juvenile detention but he'd gotten out early. I needed to think of a plan fast, but when he looked over, I had already fallen asleep at some point. After class I woke up, and Bai Jungshu brought up Lu Yingshuo again. I just scoffed, asking why I'd ever need a plan to deal with a thug. Just beat him into the ground, that's all it takes. Then Jiang Jixu burst through the door in a panic. She said breathlessly that Lu Yingshuo had just dragged the student teacher up to the rooftop by force. My chest tightened. I jumped to my feet and sprinted toward the rooftop. Up on the rooftop, the air had already turned ice cold. Lu Yingshuo stood over Lee Seojun, looking down at him with total contempt. Lee Seojun's face was full of confusion and wariness. Lu Yingshuo turned to Lin Minsheng beside him, confirmed he had the right person, then studied Lee Seojun's face carefully. After a long moment he said with cold contempt, "What a waste of a face. Someone this clean-cut and handsome just made his blood boil the more he looked." Then he pulled out a cigarette and moved to light it on the spot. Lee Seojun immediately stepped forward to stop him, telling him not to smoke on school grounds. He even reached out and grabbed Lu Yingshuo's wrist, holding firm and refusing to let go. Lu Yingshuo looked at him with irritation and snapped at him to stop talking nonsense. Lee Seojun held his ground, stating that smoking was strictly banned on campus and moving to confiscate the cigarette. Those words pushed Lu Yingshuo's patience over the edge. Meanwhile, I was still tearing through the stairwell like a maniac. I finally reached the top, shoved the rooftop door open, and the sight in front of me stopped me dead. I had walked in just in time to see Lu Yingshuo's fist connect hard with Lee Seojun's face. Jiang Jixu and another student had followed me up and gasped in shock at the sight. My mind went completely blank. There was no time to reach him. All I could do was watch helplessly as Lee Seojun lost his balance and hit the ground, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. Lu Yingshuo looked down at Lee Seojun with the same swagger, saying a lowly student teacher had no business giving him orders. Then he raised his foot as if to bring it down on Lee Seojun. Pure white-hot rage swept through me. Every last bit of reason burned away. Without a word, I slammed my fist into Lu Yingshuo's face, then ripped off my jacket and threw it to the ground, closing in on him one deliberate step at a time, eyes full of intent to destroy. I snarled through gritted teeth, cursing him out as every foul word came to mind, the fury nearly spilling out of my eyes. Then I charged in and started hammering him, punch after punch landing on him. The force of the blows had him spitting blood with every hit. Seeing him put on his performance of being in pain, I told him to drop the act. Then Lu Yingshuo suddenly laughed and yanked me into a tight hold out of nowhere, voice going low and unhinged, saying I was doing something to him. The sudden contact made my whole body go rigid, and a wave of revulsion hit me. He buried his face in my neck, voice feverish, saying he'd seen plenty of girls but none had ever beaten him until he spit blood. I was the first, and it only made him more obsessed. I shoved him away hard, looking at him with pure disgust and calling him a lunatic. Then I clenched my fist again, and promised to keep hitting him until he couldn't get up. At that moment, startled cries from behind broke up the standoff between us. Bai Jungshu called out urgently that the teacher was unconscious and had to be taken to the hospital immediately, or things would turn fatal. The second I heard that, any urge to keep fighting Lu Yingshuo drained out of me. I stepped up to Lu Yingshuo, deliberately bringing up his nickname drawn from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, then said with quiet menace that in the story Lu Bu was hanged, so he'd better wash his neck and wait, and I wasn't going to leave him in one piece. Lin Minsheng worked up the nerve from his corner to taunt me, asking if I was trying to run away under the cover of taking someone to the hospital. Lu Yingshuo wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and broke into an amused smile, telling Lin Minsheng to drop it. His eyes followed my back with an intense gaze, and he said to himself that the harder it was to have something, the more appealing it became. So the process of taming it himself was going to be very interesting. That evening, I spotted Lee Seojun sitting alone on the rooftop from a distance, something quietly desolate in the way he sat. I didn't dare go up. I just stood at the stairwell entrance and watched him, heavy with worry, getting beaten unconscious by a student. For someone who wanted nothing more than to be a good teacher, that had to be a devastating blow. Then I noticed something sliding down his cheek. My chest clenched. I rushed up immediately, but when I got close I found he was holding a bowl of instant noodles, and the liquid on his face was just broth that had splashed up. I froze on the spot. Lee Seojun looked up with a smile and said lightly that he was sorry for startling me. He He'd just had a sudden craving for a late-night snack. He explained he'd thrown together a simple bowl of noodles and hadn't meant to cause a misunderstanding. I looked down and quietly asked if he was really okay, and whether the spots where he'd been hit still hurt. He lifted a hand to touch his cheek, said it was already much better and that he was fine. He even said with a bit of wonder that the red-haired student hit surprisingly hard. Someone with that kind of talent should really think about going into fighting. I was so frustrated I raised my voice, clenching my fists and snapping that a student hitting a teacher was not okay. Said someone like that deserved a good thrashing with a baseball bat to teach him some manners. Lee Seo-jun gently ruffled my hair, his voice full of patience and quiet resolve. He said that being hit by a student hurt far less than watching them go down the wrong path and sink deeper and deeper into it. He paused, then said in a voice that was gentle but firm, guiding students and steering them away from going astray was exactly what being a teacher was about. That was Lee Seo-jun through and through. He'd always been this way, carrying that same gentleness and conviction. Even when he ran into the worst kinds of troublemakers, a few sincere words from him could always cut through, reaching those who had lost their way and giving them reason to turn around. But there were people in this world who were beyond reaching, like the troublemakers at Jiangshan High School, who didn't respond to his gentle approach at all. The next day, Lee Seo-jun walked into the staff restroom and stopped cold at what he saw. Yin Jung-kyu stood there with a cigarette hanging from his lips, blocking the entrance with a few others. Yin Jung-kyu spoke with pointed sarcasm, deliberately making things difficult for Lee Seo-jun. Lee Seo-jun made it clear that this was the staff restroom, said students weren't allowed in without permission, and told Yin Jung-kyu and the others to put out their cigarettes immediately. Yin Jung-kyu spat the cigarette butt out and ground it underfoot, daring him to say that one more time. Just then, I walked into school with Bai Zhongshu and found the students ahead already out of control. Every rule thrown out the window. They were causing trouble long before class had even started, smoking and drinking openly, acting completely unhinged, like they were all on something. Bai Zhongshu pulled out his phone, his expression grim, saying Lu Yingxue was already making his move. He handed me the phone. It showed that Lu Yingxue had given them the green light to act out like this, just to tie me down. The moment those words were said, a dull thud rang out and a figure was slammed hard into the corridor wall. I looked up sharply. The one who had been knocked down was none other than Lee Seo-jun. Yin Jung-kyu stood over Lee Seo-jun with a look of arrogant menace, demanding to know why Lee Seo-jun would come to a school like this and try to play the good teacher. Yin Jung-kyu taunted him, sneering that if he wanted to play teacher-student games, he should have gone somewhere else. His laughter was grating, sending the two other student teachers nearby trembling, and the rage in my chest was nearly at the point of bursting, the air around me turning dangerous. I watched as Yin Jung-kyu raised his foot, about to bring it down on Lee Seo-jun. I forced my anger down and spoke, voice cold and sharp, asking Yin Jung-kyu what he was doing. Yin Jung-kyu turned and caught sight of me. His foot froze in midair. I clenched my fists, wanting nothing more than to rush over and smash his face in, to make him pay, and take down every last troublemaker in the room. But then without warning, a thought cut through my mind. Lee Seo-jun's eyes full of disappointment, and just like that, the fire in me was doused. Seeing my reaction, Yin Jung-kyu just gave Lee Seo-jun a light kick, dropped a menacing warning, then led his crew away in force, deliberately avoiding a direct confrontation with me. I stood there, nails biting into my palms, but the pain was nothing compared to the fury burning inside. Still, I understood. The school had fallen apart because of Lu Yingxue pulling the strings from behind the scenes. As long as he was around, the trouble would never stop. Right then, Lu Yingxue came sauntering over, acting casual, asking what had happened. I glared at him and called him out for playing dumb. Lu Yingxue didn't miss a beat, just curved his lips and stepped toward me. Still with that same easy teasing tone, saying the serious look on my face was honestly kind of adorable. He lowered his voice with deliberate intent, saying he could give me everything I wanted. As long as I was willing to yield and comply, he promised he'd never lay a finger on Lee Seo-jun. His gaze burning, he laid out his condition. Just say the word that I was willing to be his woman. Something shifted in me, and I immediately started calculating. I deliberately put on a face of compliance and resignation. Lu Yingxue visibly stiffened, clearly not expecting me to agree so easily. I took advantage of the split second he was off guard, reached out and grabbed him by the collar, rose up on my toes and kissed him. Bai Zhongshu's eyes went wide as plates, jaw dropped far enough to fit an egg. Zhang Jixi went rigid where she stood, looking completely unable to process what she was seeing. The students around exploded into noise, everyone rattled by what had just happened, talking over each other in a frenzy. After a moment, I pulled back from Lu Yingxue, smiled with an edge, and lightly traced a fingertip along the corner of his mouth, then said in a deliberately breezy tone that since that was settled, they should head out for that date right now. Lu Yingxue came back to himself, eyes bright with excitement, and rode off with me on his red hair away from the school. The wind tore past their ears, and his voice, edged with a smile, cut through the rush of it. Lu Yingxue said I had guts. I was the first girl who had ever ridden on his red hair without screaming. He told me to say wherever I wanted to go. There was nowhere around here his red hair couldn't reach. I was quiet for a moment, then said softly that I wanted somewhere quiet. Lu Yingxue asked with mild curiosity where exactly. I wrapped my arms around his waist and pressed my cheek lightly against his back. Said that he'd know the kind of place. Somewhere they could be alone, with no chance of being disturbed. Lu Yingxue gave a low laugh, voice buzzing with excitement, saying that Jiangshan High School girls really were something else when they let loose, and declared that he was absolutely going to have me. He brought me to a warehouse out at the edge of town. Lu Yingxue looked over the empty space, his voice carrying a sense of complete control, calling it his territory. Said no one would be able to bother them here. Then Lu Yingxue dropped casually onto the couch and announced that the small talk was over. Time to get down to business. business. He slowly took off his jacket, gaze burning and unguarded, not bothering to hide what he wanted. I had every intention of teaching him a lesson but not killing him, so I quietly let go of the steel rod behind me and took off my own jacket too. I smiled and said, let's have a proper conversation, with our fists. The moment I stepped in front of Lu Yingshuo, I swore and swung hard. Lu Yingshuo caught my fist again with precision, saying he'd known from the start I was too crafty. He'd seen through my plan immediately, lure him to a deserted location and settle it there. I pulled at my trapped fist with force and admitted it openly, saying there had been too many eyes at school. I had to hold back there. Lu Yingshuo raised an eyebrow and asked why I was so dead set on fighting him to the end. I let out a scornful laugh, rage flaring up, asking him how he dared question why. He was the one who had thrown the school into chaos. He was the one who shamelessly talked about claiming me, and he was the one who had put his hands on Lee Seo Jun, and now he had the nerve to ask me why. Burning with fury, I gripped my fist hard and swung at him again. The two of them locked up tight, forces clashing and holding, neither giving an inch. In the empty warehouse, the air between them crackled like a powder keg about to blow. I deliberately softened my voice with a hint of provocation, asking if he really thought this was a contest of raw strength. Then Lu Yingshuo eased up a little on his grip, and his tone shifted, quieter, no longer burning. He brought up someone he'd come across a while back, a girl who was very pretty but impossibly stubborn, someone who never gave in easily. He paused, eyes filled with an almost disturbing obsession, and asked me if I knew how he had eventually gotten what he wanted with that girl. He answered his own question, strength. He had broken her down with absolute force. Lu Yingshuo said that watching a beautiful girl realize the difference in strength between them, then fall apart and cry in helplessness, was the ultimate satisfaction. And now, he intended to make me experience that exact feeling of being conquered. The words had barely left his mouth when he suddenly tightened his grip, crushing my fingers until they throbbed with pain. He snarled that he would show me the absolute way a strong man takes what he wants from a woman, then threw me hard, and came at me with a crushing punch right after. The blow landed and my chest seized up, a dull ache spreading through it. I gritted my teeth and cursed under my breath. He was nothing but a dumb, deranged control freak. Lu Yingshuo came at me again, his tone mocking, telling me to keep fighting back. He said the harder I resisted, the more satisfying it would be when I finally broke. I barely managed to throw up a block in time, a numbing ache shooting through my arm. This was the first opponent I'd faced since starting school who hit with that kind of explosive force. Lu Yingshuo pressed in, voice full of self-satisfaction, curious about what face I'd make when I admitted defeat. The section of wall I had just dodged away from caved in where his fist hit. He kept coming, punches sharp and relentless. I blocked and struck back with everything I had, barely managing to hold my own. Staring at that strawberry head face of his, I muttered that this guy was annoyingly hard to put down. While I was momentarily distracted muttering about him, I took another heavy hit. I coughed up a mouthful of blood, and my breathing went uneven. Lu Yingshuo stood over me, asking if I was starting to feel the gap between us. He kept throwing punches while taunting me, certain that I was no match for him, and would have to submit sooner or later. I shot back with impatience, telling him he was both crude and ridiculous. Nothing but strength out of his mouth, nothing in his head beyond brute force. Lu Yingshuo laughed sharply and asked if I was any different. I also used force to dominate the entire Jiangshan High School, just to get a student teacher to like me. Before the words were fully out, he slammed a punch into my jaw. The pain forced a grunt out of me, but I quickly steadied myself and came back. Lu Yingshuo grew even more unhinged, saying there was nothing wrong with that. It was actually exactly why he was drawn to me, because just like him, there was something fierce buried inside me that understood the law of strength. Then Lu Yingshuo roared his declaration. There was nothing that strength couldn't get. He would use strength to take everything he wanted, including me. Warm blood was trickling slowly down my forehead, dripping onto the floor and spreading into dark red rings. Enough of his nonsense. I had reached my absolute limit. Strength winning a fight was an undeniable fact, but strength was not everything, and there were things it could never get. I clenched my fist, gathered every bit of force in my body, and drove it straight at his face. The punch hit with everything I had, and Lu Yingshuo spit blood on impact. Stunned, his eyes flashed with disbelief, the arrogance from moments ago completely gone. I moved toward him step by step, calmly explaining what real force actually meant. Fighting was never about the kind of dumb, blind muscle he was using. It followed a method. You start by driving through the legs, using that as the base, then twist from the core to build up the chain of force, then concentrate the full power of the body at the peak of the fist, and throw with momentum to land a decisive blow. The moment I finished speaking, I followed exactly that technique and drove my fist into his face, and told him bluntly he had picked the wrong person to mess with. The sheer force of the hit launched Lu Yingshuo off his feet, body carving an arc through the air. He slammed into the cold warehouse wall and crumpled to the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood. I walked over to him slowly and said seriously, there was one more thing, and it was the most important. The human heart could never be held by force. Only sincerity could make it choose to stay. Love was never something you could claim by force. Those words landed like a key, prying open something locked deep inside Lu Yingshuo. When he was young, his family had been well off. Whatever he wanted, he could have. He was the center of attention everywhere he went, and the object of envy in the eyes of everyone around him, until the day his family went bankrupt, and everything changed. His father's business collapsed, sending their once comfortable family into poverty overnight. He could no longer have the things he wanted just because he wanted them, and the need to possess built up inside him, slowly twisting into something darker. There was a kid who had always been jealous of him, who came over showing off a new toy car, and deliberately taunted Lu Yingshuo that his family was now poor as beggars. At that moment, all he felt was the desperate need to satisfy the hunger inside him. So he launched himself at the kid with red-rimmed eyes to snatch the toy, when the kid refused to hand it over. In the struggle that followed, he came to the simplest and most direct answer. Use force to take it. Use his fists to seize it. Overpower any resistance with brute strength. Having everything was the right of the strong. The weak had no choice but to submit. That was the law of strength carved into his bones since childhood. But now, his eyes were full of confusion. He couldn't understand. He had been doing exactly this for years, taking everything through strength. Nothing had ever been beyond his reach that way. That was how it was supposed to work. He didn't understand what gave me the right to shatter all of that, or why the whole situation had flipped completely in an instant. Now it was my turn to rain down a relentless barrage on him with no mercy. Every punch a rebuttal of his warped beliefs, every blow a punishment for what he had done. The hits came fast and heavy, beating him into the ground with no room to fight back. Nothing to do but take it. I looked down at him in that sorry state and cut through his laughable obsession with a cold voice. Lu Yingshuo's eyes blazed with fury, and a torrent of curses came out. I let out a cold laugh. Since he still hadn't learned his lesson, I'd keep going until reality sank in. My barrage came down like rain, every punch cutting through the air with force, landing precisely where it would hit hardest. I said to him with a mocking lilt, if we're going by his whole strength is everything logic, then clearly I was the stronger one right now, which meant he had absolutely no claim on me. I gave a short laugh, deliberately mirroring his earlier arrogance as I turned it back on him. If I'm stronger than you right now, does that mean the entire world should just naturally belong to me? The next second I let the smile drop, cutting through the act. Everything he had done was nothing more than a thug's behavior, using brute strength to push around whoever was weaker. That wasn't what being strong looked like. I raised my foot and brought it down hard on his chest, and demanded he go get on his knees and beg Lee Seo Jun for forgiveness. Lu Yingshuo could barely breathe under my weight, but something entirely new was churning inside him, a confusion and bitterness he had never felt before. It was the first time he had ever realized that there really were things even strength couldn't get. I clenched my fist once more and declared, this fight over possession was ending here. At that moment, the warehouse door was suddenly thrown open. A crowd came storming into the warehouse. On closer look, every single one of them was a student from our school. Lin Minsheng was at the front, grinning with excitement and telling everyone to come watch me crawling on the ground after being beaten to a pulp by Lu Yingshuo. But when they looked, every single one of them froze on the spot, faces blank with disbelief. Because it wasn't me being beaten at all. It was Lu Yingshuo flat on the ground with me standing on top of him, in an absolutely pitiful state. I shot them a glance, voice thick with contempt, mocking them for running their mouths outside without the guts to come in alone. A pathetic bunch, every one of them. Lin Minsheng's eyes went wide, unable to believe this was the complete opposite of what they had expected, while Yin Zhengqiu took one look at the situation and calmly signaled his crew to come closer. The next second, someone was hurled in hard and hit the ground with a heavy crash. The moment I recognized it was Lee Seo Jun, my chest seized and rage exploded to the top of my head. I cursed them out for daring to put their hands on the student teacher. This was completely out of line. I drove my foot hard into Lu Yingshuo's chest and ordered him to tell them to let the man go. Lu Yingshuo seized the moment when my attention was split, gritted his teeth and used every bit of strength to shove my foot away. Caught off guard, I stumbled slightly and lost my chance to keep him pinned down. He struggled to push himself up against the wall, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, eyes still burning with the same obsession. He had to admit that I was no easy opponent. My strength was far beyond anything he had expected. But Lu Yingshuo had never once in his life failed to get something he wanted. I clenched my fists and snarled at him. Was he still not thinking straight even now? Lu Yingshuo suddenly broke into a cold, menacing smile and used Lee Seo Jun as leverage to warn me not to move. He growled that if I so much as twitched, Lee Seo Jun would get his head caved in right there. Then he lunged forward, grabbed me by the hair and slammed my head down to the ground. He laid into my back with punch after punch, ranting through gritted teeth about what he had planned all along. He had seen this coming. He'd brought Lee Seo Jun as leverage specifically to make me submit and claim me for himself. He just hadn't expected to have to use it at such a disadvantageous moment. While he was pounding away at me, the unconscious Lee Seo Jun slowly began to come around. The moment he opened his eyes, Choi Dong-hyun immediately stepped up and clamped a hand around his throat, holding him completely still. Lin Minsheng laughed with satisfaction, sneering at Lee Seo Jun that waking up wouldn't do him any good. He was too weak to do a thing but sit there and watch me get dealt with. Lu Yingshuo stopped his fists, grabbed me by the hair and wrenched my head up by force. He stared down at me with the patronizing arrogance of someone doing a favor and gave me a choice. Either become his woman and do exactly as he said from now on, or die here alongside Lee Seo Jun. I spat a mouthful of blood straight in his face, eyes blazing with defiance and contempt, and refused him one word at a time. Lu Yingshuo went still for a moment, then a crazed look spread across his face. This was the first time he had ever failed to get a girl he wanted. If he couldn't have me, then he would destroy me completely. He clenched his fist, loaded it with enough force to be devastating, and drove it straight down toward me. I was pinned completely beneath him, both arms locked with nowhere to go. I thought grimly to myself, was I really going to have to take that punch head on? There was a dull thud, but Lu Yingshuo's fist didn't reach me, stopping dead in midair. Lu Yingshuo froze in place, his face a picture of shock. Everyone else in the warehouse was struck speechless too. I snapped my head around and saw Lee Seo-jun. Somehow he had broken free and come charging in, catching Lu Yingshuo's punch barehanded. His arm was trembling slightly, but he held firm in front of me, exactly like he had shielded me all those years ago. He stared hard at Lu Yingshuo, the gentleness gone from his face, leaving only seriousness and barely contained fury. Then he said in a cold voice that what Lu Yingshuo was doing to a woman was wrong, and stated clearly that he would not allow Lu Yingshuo to touch me again. Yin Jingqiu watched Lee Seo-jun break free and exploded in anger, turning on Choi Dong-hyun and demanding to know how he let someone escape. Couldn't even hold down one scrawny guy. Lu Yingshuo snapped at Yin Jingqiu to shut his mouth and shifted his gaze back to Lee Seo-jun. His eyes were full of contempt as he said he always ran into this type. Teachers who overestimated themselves and couldn't mind their own business. And with that, he gave a quick shake of his arm and threw off Lee Seo-jun's grip. He muttered under his breath that people like that, the ones who couldn't stop sticking their noses in, always ended up with a bad ending. As Lu Yingshuo stared into Lee Seo-jun's eyes, his mind drifted back involuntarily to 5 years ago. In that memory, a young Lu Yingshuo was smoking with a group of friends when a bald teacher walked over to stop them. Lu Yingshuo frowned in irritation. He had always despised teachers. When the bald teacher saw he wasn't listening, he got louder, pulled out a ruler, and ordered him to hand over the cigarette, calling him a wild kid with no manners who didn't know what was good for him. When Lu Yingshuo showed no fear, the bald teacher raised the ruler and came at him with it. Lu Yingshuo quickly reached out and grabbed the ruler, stared him down with cold eyes and said that was his cigarette, then twisted hard with one hand and snapped the ruler clean in two. He had always despised people who used advice as a cover to lecture others from a position of superiority, while dressing themselves up as some kind of saint, when the reality was just nauseating. So whenever he ran into that type of teacher, he had always beaten every single one of them without hesitation. Coming back to the present, Lu Yingshuo fixed Lee Seo-jun with a hard stare, his tone wrapped in killing intent, saying that the type of person he hated most was a useless do-gooder, who couldn't keep out of things that weren't their business. Lee Seo-jun met Lu Yingshuo's gaze without flinching, expression firm, saying there was no adult who would stand by and watch a child go down the wrong path. He ordered Lu Yingshuo to apologize to me. Lu Yingshuo stepped closer with a dark look in his eyes, refusing to back down and asking what Lee Seo-jun was going to do about it. Lee Seo-jun said that correcting students and putting a stop to bullying was exactly what a teacher was there for. Before he could finish, Lu Yingshuo's fist caught him in the face. I cried out and tried to rush over, but Lin Minsheng and the others held me back hard. Lu Yingshuo stepped forward, grabbed Lee Seo-jun by the throat and pinned him against the wall. He sneered at Lee Seo-jun to stop thinking so highly of himself. He was nothing but a tool to be used to tame me, and if he kept talking, Lu Yingshuo would rip out his tongue. I couldn't contain the rage burning through me. I fought my way free of the crowd and charged in, shoving Lu Yingshuo away with everything I had. I called him a bastard and told him he had just hit Lee Seo-jun a second time. There was no way he was leaving here alive. Lee Seo-jun, standing behind me where I'd shielded him, reached out and gently patted my head. His voice was calm but full of quiet strength as he said it was okay. Let him handle it with Lu Yingshuo. This was a job for a cool teacher like him. I turned to look at him, completely taken aback. It was the first time I had ever seen Lee Seo-jun this angry. Lu Yingshuo looked at Lee Seo-jun standing in front of him again, and said mockingly that he still dared to step up after taking a beating like that, saying he should have gone for the left cheek too, not just the right. That would have taught him to remember his place. He said lightly that people like me and Lee Seo-jun didn't learn until they'd suffered enough. Lee Seo-jun drew a slow breath, pushing past the pain, and looked back at Lu Yingshuo with sharp, steady eyes. He said seriously that after hurting someone you had no right to smile. Something inside Lu Yingshuo jolted. He was surprised to find that the steadiness and quiet authority in Lee Seo-jun's eyes unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. Lee Seo-jun kept going, saying honestly that Lu Yingshuo was a student of extraordinary strength and talent, but the value of that strength depended entirely on how it was used. It could earn someone respect, or it could become nothing more than a symbol that made people afraid. But strength used only to satisfy desire was no different from a cold, unfeeling weapon. His eyes were full of expectation and caution as he told Lu Yingshuo not to choose the wrong path. If he kept going down this road, sooner or later he would end up with a criminal record. Lee Seo-jun's words stirred up something in Lu Yingshuo that had been buried for years. Someone had said the same kind of thing to him before, that he had no upbringing, that just from his name you could tell he would grow up to be a criminal. Lu Yingshuo clenched his fist, forcing his anger up through gritted teeth, and snapped at Lee Seo-jun for knowing nothing. Lin Minsheng couldn't hold back any longer. He rushed forward and kicked Lee Seo-jun hard, telling him to stop running his mouth. So what if they had criminal records? That kind of scare tactic meant nothing to them. He also sneered at Lee Seo-jun for never having been behind bars, saying he had no right to act like he understood anything, and that the whole speech was none of his business. Lu Yingshuo snapped sharply at Lin Minsheng to stop. This person was his to deal with. Lin Minsheng didn't dare argue and sulked his way to the side. Lu Yingshuo turned back, eyes cold as he looked over Lee Seo-jun, voice laced with provocation, daring him to keep spouting all that nonsense. Lee Seo-jun struggled back to his feet, brushed the dust from his clothes, and said in the same steady voice that he would say it as many times as it took, until this student found his way back from the wrong path. Lu Yingshuo grabbed Lee Seo-jun by the collar and lifted him up hard. Lee Seo-jun looked him straight in the eyes without backing down, saying he would not give up on any student. Lu Yingshuo suddenly let go of Lee Seo-jun's collar and drove his fists into him over and over, letting the rage pour out unchecked. Lu Yingshuo gave a short, contemptuous laugh, saying there had been people like him before, always trying to drag him back onto what they called the right path, and none of them had changed anything in the end, because every single one of them had eventually gone down on their knees and begged for mercy in the face of his overwhelming strength. Lu Yingshuo knew exactly how strong he was, and he had seen countless people fold easily when faced with that power. But on this day, for the first time, he came face to face with someone like this. A teacher who wasn't afraid of his strength and genuinely wanted to pull him back. Eyes that carried the look of someone who truly wanted to keep a student from going astray. The real face of a teacher. He swung his fist at Lee Seo-jun again, but just as it was about to land, something stopped him cold. Lee Seo-jun was unlike every other teacher he had ever met. Even trapped in a desperate situation, the steadiness in his eyes had never once wavered. He had been completely sincere from beginning to end. I stepped forward quickly to steady Lee Seo-jun as he staggered, then looked up at Lu Yingshuo, voice filled with pride. I said, Lee Seo-jun was the coolest, and that our teacher gave everything he had for his students. Then I carefully helped Lee Seo-jun to the side and told him to rest. Lu Yingshuo refused to drop it, sneering that Lee Seo-jun was just a student teacher. He'd brought this sorry state on himself by being too arrogant and not knowing his own limits. I had no patience left for him. I clenched my fist and drove it straight into his face. The single punch sent Lu Yingshuo flying, and the sheer spectacle of it left everyone watching with their mouths open. Lin Minsheng and Yin Zhengqiu both cried out in disbelief, stunned that I had actually launched the unbeatable Lu Yingshuo across the room. I looked down at Lu Yingshuo on the ground and said plainly what was in my heart from the moment I saw Lee Seo-jun again. I had already made up my mind to help him achieve his dream, to let him become the good teacher he wanted to be. Everything else, I would finish myself. Since Lee Seo-jun had already given them a talking to, now it was time for them to pay for what they had done. Right in front of every student, I went to work on Lu Yingshuo, fists and feet, no mercy at all. At the same time, I warned everyone that from this point on, they had better show Lee Seo-jun complete respect, and that any further disrespect would not be tolerated. I told everyone watching to open their eyes and get a clear look at who exactly was the boss of Jiangshan High School. Then I ordered them all to do handstands right there and reflect on themselves until I had calmed down. On the other side, after getting my message, Bai Jungxiu came sprinting to Lu Yingshuo's warehouse. He pushed open the door and walked in on the sight of students doing handstands all over the floor as punishment. Even though he had seen plenty of scenes like this, he still couldn't help marveling at me. I was sitting on top of Lu Yingshuo, saying casually that he had missed it. Bai Zhengqiu swallowed and asked carefully if I had ended up having it out with Lu Yingshuo after all. I scoffed and said Lu Yingshuo was just all talk. Strutting around in front of me every day like that, he had it coming. Bai Zhengqiu pressed a hand to his forehead with a helpless expression, calling me a maniac, and reminded me that Lu Yingshuo was no ordinary thug. He joked that beating someone with Lu Yingshuo's overwhelming power meant I was probably not human, maybe a slightly smarter kind of ape. I shot him a cold look and warned him that another crack like that, and he would die by this ape's hands. Then I told him to get Lee Seo-jun to the hospital immediately. Bai Junxiu asked about my plans. I waved him off and told him to take the teacher first, not to worry about me. I looked at the unconscious Lu Yingshuo and said quietly that I still had something to take care of. Before long, Lu Yingshuo slowly came around, head throbbing and body aching all over. I appeared from nearby and greeted him with a smile, saying he had come to just in time. One more minute, and I would have woken him up with my fists. Lu Yingshuo stared in confusion, turning over the fact that he had been knocked out, and even harder to accept, that he had actually lost. My voice was flat but left no room for argument as I ordered him to go to the hospital first thing the next morning and apologize to Lee Seo-jun. Lu Yingshuo's face creased with displeasure, demanding to know why he had to apologize. Seeing that he still hadn't figured it out, my patience ran out and I hit him. That punch seemed to knock some sense into him. The daze in his eyes cleared a little. Then I slammed another fist into the floor beside him, the impact sending a small tremor through the ground. My eyes were cold as I spelled it out. I wasn't asking him, I was ordering him, and there was no room to negotiate. Lu Yingshuo let out a scornful laugh, saying a threat like that did nothing to him. I picked up a baseball bat lying nearby and turned it over in my hand with a look that was halfway between a smile and something far more dangerous. Then told him not to be so sure. A good beating with a baseball bat might change his mind. Lu Yingshuo stiffened and fired back that he had already taken a beating today, so that wasn't going to work on him. I smiled and stood next to the red hair, making it clear I wasn't planning to hit him. The target was the motorcycle he loved more than anything. I even remarked that the bat had a nice weight to it, good for putting a real dent in things. I told him that someone like him losing what he cared about most would be crushed, so I was being generous and giving him 5 seconds to say his goodbyes to the red hair. Lu Yingshuo panicked instantly, calling me a maniac and saying he wanted nothing to do with me, and promised on the spot to go apologize, begging me over and over not to touch his red hair. The next day, at the hospital, the nurses kept gathering to gossip, going on about how unbelievably good-looking Lee Seo-jun was, even more handsome than any celebrity. Their chatter drifted to my ears. I glanced over at Lee Seo-jun in the hospital bed and couldn't help quietly agreeing. Lee Seo-jun gave a helpless smile, saying his injuries weren't that serious, and there was no need to go through the trouble of staying in hospital. I immediately pushed back, voice firm and leaving no room for argument. He was not setting one foot outside this hospital until he had fully recovered. Lee Seo-jun gently reminded me that it was a hospital, and to keep the noise down, I was disturbing other patients. I quickly bowed and apologized to the other patients. Lee Seo-jun looked at me and asked with concern whether I was feeling any better. I immediately straightened up and said with a smile that I was perfectly fine, adding proudly that everyone in my family had an iron constitution. Just then, a familiar voice came through. It was Lu Yingshuo. He called out my name. I turned sharply and met his gaze, which was noticeably uneasy. Then Lu Yingshuo walked over to Lee Seo-jun's bedside and bowed deeply and respectfully. He apologized for using violence against such an angelic teacher, said he was reflecting deeply on his actions, and asked for the teacher's forgiveness, while simultaneously clenching his fists and grinding his teeth, seething inside. Damn it. He was actually bowing his head to someone. The only reason he was lowering himself like this was to protect the red hair. Lee Seo-jun smiled and reached out, resting a hand on Lu Yingshuo's shoulder, and thanked him warmly. But the matter of using violence against me couldn't simply be left at that. He had to face up to what he had done. He paused, then asked with genuine curiosity why Lu Yingshuo had done those things to me in the first place. My stomach dropped. In all the focus on forcing Lu Yingshuo to apologize to Lee Seo-jun, I had completely forgotten to come up with a cover story for what had happened before. This was going to blow up. Lu Yingshuo scratched his head and explained that he had been interested in me and wanted to pursue me, but I wouldn't have him, so he lost his temper and lashed out. Lee Seo-jun's tone stayed gentle, but his stance was clear. Being rejected was no excuse for hitting someone. Lu Yingshuo nodded along quickly, insisting over and over that he was reflecting seriously on his behavior. Lee Seo-jun pressed further, asking that if he liked Gushila, why did he bring her to a warehouse? Lu Yingshuo's first instinct was to say that I liked Lee Seo-jun, but the words were halfway out before he caught himself. I immediately made a throat-slitting gesture at him, eyes loaded with warning. Say one more word and he was finished. Lu Yingshuo got the message instantly and awkwardly switched course, saying he had heard that Lee Seo-jun and I were close and he had done it out of jealousy. He was clearly eager to get out of there after that. He told Lee Seo-jun to take care of himself and that they would meet again, and turned to leave. Lee Seo-jun smiled and nodded, then added softly that he wasn't sure whether he'd see Lu Yingshuo around school anymore. Lu Yingshuo stopped walking and turned back to look at Lee Seo-jun. Something complicated in his expression. He hesitated for a moment, then asked a question. How do you get something that can't be gotten through force? Lee Seo-jun's face softened into a warm smile at that, and told him, with a sincere heart, and by protecting what mattered. Looking at him, Lu Yingshuo had just one thought in his mind. The more he looked at this guy, the more he wanted to punch him. That evening, out by the wall at the edge of the hospital grounds, Lu Yingshuo was leaning back against it, about to light the cigarette in his hand. I walked up quickly and stopped him firmly, telling him clearly that smoking was not allowed at hospitals. Lu Yingshuo raised an eyebrow and asked in a teasing voice if I had come around and wanted to be his after all, and had come here specially to find him. I gave him a flat look and told him to stop being ridiculous. For Lee Seo-jun's sake, I wasn't going to hold yesterday against him, but that was a one-time exception. I stared at him coldly and warned that if he ever did anything like that to another girl, I would make sure he never had the nerve to try again. Lu Yingshuo looked genuinely puzzled, asking what I was going on about. He had never done anything like that to any other girl. I clenched my fists in frustration, telling him to stop playing dumb. He had said himself that he used force to get what he wanted from a girl before. Just as Lu Yingshuo was about to explain, a bright, sweet voice cut in. A girl came over to Lu Yingshuo's side, calling out to him in a familiar way and asking if he was done. Lu Yingshuo frowned with obvious irritation, telling her to stop clinging and get away from him, but the girl didn't seem bothered and stayed right there beside him. I stared at this scene in pure disbelief, completely unprepared for the fact that he had a girlfriend. Lu Yingshuo acknowledged the girl's presence in a flat tone, saying this was the girl he had brought up during their fight. She had rejected him at first, but later she had been drawn in by his strength and come to him on her own. I was so furious I called him a scumbag through my teeth. He had a girlfriend and was still harassing me and pulling all that nonsense. But Lu Yingshuo looked completely unbothered, saying it was only natural for a strong man to have many women around him, and declared that even though he hadn't gotten me this time, sooner or later he would claim me. I had no interest in continuing this conversation. I called him a lunatic and walked away, thinking to myself that there truly was not a single normal person in this school. The showdown between Zhongshan High School's two giants that had set the whole school buzzing finally came to a close, with my victory. After all of that, my position at the school was more unshakable than ever, and no one dared pick a fight with me again. For the rest of Lee Seo-jun's internship, everything went smoothly without a single incident. Before anyone realized, the final day of Lee Seo-jun's internship had arrived. The students crowded around him in excitement, bringing flowers and putting a commemorative cap on him, making it a real occasion. I watched his back as he was surrounded, and felt nothing but genuine happiness for him. Once everyone gathered on the field, all the students stood at attention and bowed in unison to the teachers on cue. Cheers rose one after another, everyone calling out words of thanks to the three student teachers. The male student teacher covered his mouth, unable to stop himself from tearing up, moved by how quickly the internship had passed. The female student teacher choked up as she recalled the confusion of those first days, when the students had seemed so terrifying. But her impression had completely changed. She said honestly that they were all pure-hearted kids who just didn't know how to show it. I knew perfectly well that the students below were happy simply because Lee Seo-jun was finally leaving. They had worked so hard keeping up the act of being well behaved this whole time, cursing Lee Seo-jun in their heads more times than could be counted, complaining about me endlessly. I looked toward Lee Seo-jun in the crowd again, and something bittersweet stirred inside me, a mix of reluctance and, strangely, a kind of quiet relief. After today, he wouldn't be coming to the school anymore. Honestly, putting on the act had been exhausting for me too. Forcing knowledge into my head when it just refused to go in was genuinely painful. Watching his warm smile, I found myself smiling back without meaning to. Lee Seo-jun really was at his best when he smiled. I made a quiet wish inside that he would one day become the truly remarkable teacher he was meant to be, and that I would push myself to catch up to where he stood until we could walk side by side. That evening after school, Lee Seo-jun came home and packed his things right away, then politely thanked my father for taking care of him all this time. My father waved it off, told him not to mention it, and suggested one last drink before he left. I said quietly that I wanted to invite him upstairs to the rooftop for some air first, if he had a moment. On the rooftop, I pulled a box from my bag and handed it to him, and said it was a gift. Inside was a handmade cake. I had actually put real effort into making it, and made sure to add plenty of the honeydew melon he loved. I wanted to use this to properly celebrate this moment with him. Lee Seo-jun took the cake, and his eyes filled instantly with warmth. He thanked me softly, voice quieter than usual. He walked to the edge of the rooftop and looked out over the view below, saying that today was the last day, and the last time he would look down at all of this. I hesitated for a moment, but the question I'd been holding on to finally came out. Why had he wanted to become a teacher so badly? Lee Seo-jun slipped into the memory. He said gently that when he was a student, there was a teacher who had helped and encouraged him through a great deal, and from that point on he had made it his goal to become that kind of person, someone cool who could give students strength. He also laughed at himself a little, saying he still had a long road ahead before he reached that goal. I told him firmly that he would absolutely get there. In my eyes, he was already that kind of teacher, and I kept telling him to believe in himself more. Lee Seo-jun smiled and nodded his appreciation, eyes full of warmth. I asked what he was planning to do after the internship ended, wanting to know more about what came next for him. He said he was going to focus on studying for the exam and give everything he had to pass the teacher certification. With a reluctance I couldn't quite hide, I told him that even when he got busy, he had to reach out from time to time. Lee Seo-jun smiled and promised to stay in touch, that he wouldn't disappear without a word again and worry me like last time. Early the next morning, Lee Seo-jun left our home. I thought quietly to myself that it would probably be a long time before I saw him again, at least until after he passed the certification exam. And so this internship, full of chaos but full of memories, finally came to a close. When I got to school, I spent the whole time slumped over my desk in a daze. Lin Minsheng, Yin Zhengqiu, and Choi Dong-hyun all gathered around asking, now that the student teacher was gone, did that mean they didn't have to keep acting like model students anymore? I lifted my head and said flatly that it was up to them. Just don't bother me. The moment those words landed, all three of them broke into enormous grins. The news spread instantly, and the entire school erupted in cheers, everyone shouting that they were free. Some things never change. You really can't teach an old dog new tricks. Within no time at all, the school had returned to exactly what it had been before. Smoking, drinking, noise, and chaos. Days passed one after another without much happening, and Liu Yingshuo never gave up his attempts to bother me. But by the time he graduated and left, he had never gotten anywhere. It had all come to nothing. The teachers were all left wondering what on earth had happened, while I spent my days propping my head up in class, drifting along in a fog. Who knew that school life without all the excitement could be this dull? A year passed before anyone realized, and the new student enrollment ceremony arrived. All the students were gathered in the main hall. The principal stood at the podium, visibly trembling, and tried to give his speech. Before he had even finished, the room below him descended into chaos. One guy got kicked straight off the stage. Another stepped up with his fists clenched and introduced himself with bravado, saying his name was Kim Yoo-jin, known as the Rooster King. He declared that he was there to take control of the first years, and if anyone had a problem, they were welcome to step up. One new student immediately stepped forward, taunting him and asking what he thought he was saying. Kim Yoo-jin didn't back down an inch, mocking him for showing up at the wrong place. Shrimpy. Bai Jungsu watched with delight, saying with a grin that this year's first years had real backbone. New students should have that energy. It was exactly what Zhongshan High School was about. The sound of punches connecting rang out repeatedly. I glanced at the brawling new students, completely unmoved. No matter how much they swaggered, none of them were getting past me, firmly at the top. I was a second year now, and there was no point wasting my time on first years. I stood there and watched their little show in peace. The principal on stage had long since gotten used to scenes like this. When the noise died down a little, the principal continued and said there was a new teacher to introduce to everyone. He then invited the person up and asked everyone to give a round of applause. Yin Jingqiu watched the mayhem below with a grin, saying this year's new students were interesting. But Choi Dong-hyun suddenly grabbed his arm beside him and stuttered at him to look at the stage. The smile on Yin Jingqiu's face locked up instantly. Bai Jungsu's eyes went wide. I followed their gaze toward the stage and went completely still. The person standing there in a suit with a gentle smile, it was unmistakably Lee Seo-jun. How had he come back? And as the school's English teacher of all things, I pushed through to the front of the hall, equal parts stunned and furious. He hadn't said a word about coming to teach here when we had been messaging just that morning. Lee Seo-jun smiled and turned his gaze to me, softly explaining why he had returned. The internship experience here last year had been unlike anything else, and it had left a deep impression on him. That memory had been what made up his mind to come back, and it was something of a surprise for the students he had taught the year before. The second and third years all bristled and shook with indignation. Everyone cursed under their breath. What exactly was that insufferable pretty boy thinking? He had made their lives miserable last year and still had the nerve to come back. The first-year students who had been brawling looked at each other in confusion, unable to understand why the second and third years were reacting so intensely. Lee Seo-jun continued, saying he would do his best with the determination to give everything to this school, and that he hoped to stay until every person in the room had graduated, and he asked them all to look out for each other from here on. I murmured to myself in total disbelief at what I was hearing. Yin Jin-kyu and Choi Dong-hyun were completely frozen. After a long moment, I pressed my hand to my forehead with a helpless sigh. With things turning out this way, it looked like from here on, for Lee Seo-jun's sake, in this school that looked calm on the surface but was guaranteed to be anything but, I was going to have to make every moment left here count more than anyone else. The moment the enrollment ceremony ended, every student started cleaning the campus on my orders. Kim Yoo-jin stood in the middle of it all, his mind drifting back to his middle school days without meaning to. Back then, he had been the loudest one in the room, spending every day buried in fights, sharpening his skills in brawl after brawl, until he had finally made it into this most notorious of delinquent high schools. He had come planning to use his fists to prove he was the strongest, but reality had knocked him flat. He looked down at the broom in his hands, completely at a loss. He had come to fight and be king, so how did he end up with a broom? The older students nagged at him, this first year, to stop standing there and get cleaning. Kim Yoo-jin threw the broom down with a shout, cursing that he hadn't come here to clean. This so-called model school was completely ridiculous. He yelled at the students around him that this was supposed to be a delinquent school, demanding to know which idiot had come up with these stupid rules, telling everyone to forget about seniority and come fight him right now. Yin Jin-kyu and Choi Dong-hyun shook their heads repeatedly at the sight. I had already moved toward him from behind, following the noise, and properly dealt with this clueless new student, then strolled back to the school building without a care. The moment I reached the corridor, I ran into Lee Seo-jun again, still as handsome and magnetic as ever, now officially the school's English teacher. I walked up and said hello, feeling my face warm up without being able to stop it. I had always called him Appa before, but with his title changed now, it was time to start calling him teacher. I said that seeing him at the ceremony today had nearly given me a heart attack, and praised him with genuine admiration for passing the teacher certification on his first try. From what I'd heard, that exam was notoriously hard. I smiled at him, happy for him from the bottom of my heart, and congratulated him on finally living out his dream of becoming a teacher. Lee Seo-jun smiled warmly, and said that becoming a cool teacher, that was only just beginning. Looking at how earnest he was, something nagged at me. He seemed unusually attached to the idea of being a cool teacher. Was there something behind that? Before I could ask, Lee Seo-jun gently pointed out that the bell had rung and told me to get back to class. I quickly called out to stop him, heart racing as I ran through the idea in my head. Lee Seo-jun had achieved his dream, and the school was more settled than before. Maybe I could afford to be a little bolder. I took a deep breath and worked up the courage to ask if he was free after school. After school, on the trendy street near the high school. Kim Yoo-jin looked around with a frown, asking how the legendary Jiangshan High School had ended up like this. He banged his fist against the wall as he complained. No smoking, no drinking, no fighting, no swearing. It was nothing like a delinquent school, more like a monastery. A student nearby let out a sigh and said helplessly that who could have expected there to be a girl who was basically a monster. He had just been walking along with a cigarette and she had beaten him half to death, even cracked a rib. Kim Yoo-jin grew more and more worked up, even suggesting they stage a coup, overthrow all these ridiculous rules and restore the school's reputation. Another student immediately waved him off, telling him to give up that fantasy. Apparently the year before, after the entire school rose up, she had beaten everyone down, and the aftermath had been brutal. Kim Yoo-jin was too worked up to watch where he was going and walked straight into someone. The other person quickly stepped aside and motioned an apology. He looked up and glared, and with all the frustration he'd been carrying and nowhere to put it, here was a ready-made target delivered right to him. Meanwhile, I had already arrived in the street with Lee Seo-jun, to make the most of this time alone with him. I had dressed up carefully for the occasion. Wearing the skirt I had planned ahead and taking the time to fix my hair just right. The excuse I had used to get him out was buying reference books, but as far as I was concerned, this was a date. Looking at his handsome profile, I felt both nervous and excited. For this, I had studied dating tips all through class, and had already found a restaurant with amazing reviews in advance. I had quietly made up my mind that this time, I was going to close the gap between us. I was just about to suggest heading to the restaurant I had found, when Lee Seo-jun's eyes suddenly sharpened and he reached out to lightly touch my arm, nodding urgently toward a spot where a fight had broken out. My heart sank. The last thing I wanted was to deal with this right now. But the words had barely formed in my head before I caught the uniform on the person fighting, and went silent. It was our school's uniform, and it was Kim Yoo-jin. the exact person I had straightened out just that morning. Kim Yoo-jin was in the middle of the fight and loving it, shouting that this was exactly how a delinquent school student was supposed to act. The onlookers whispered among themselves, and he got more and more smug, lifting his chin to brag about finally getting to let off some steam. The next second, Lee Seo-jun stepped forward and grabbed Kim Yoo-jin by the arm. His tone was easy but firm as he introduced himself as a teacher from Jangshan High School and told Kim Yoo-jin to calm down first. Kim Yoo-jin's mood was killed instantly, and he spun around in a fury, shaking off Lee Seo-jun's hand. He cursed and threatened to put a dent in Lee Seo-jun's head, and warned that no matter who someone was, sticking their nose in was a death wish. Watching Kim Yoo-jin talk to Lee Seo-jun with that kind of nerve, my blood instantly reached boiling point. I had specifically told him not to start any trouble, and here he was, not only causing a scene off school grounds but being completely disrespectful to Lee Seo-jun. He had a death wish. Kim Yoo-jin was just about to throw a punch when he caught me out of the corner of his eye, standing not far away with fury written all over my face. He froze on the spot, and most of that aggressive swagger drained away in an instant. Meanwhile, Lee Seo-jun was still patiently talking things through with Kim Yoo-jin beside him. I kept my eyes on Kim Yoo-jin, gaze eyes cold, sending him a silent warning that one more move and he was done. Kim Yoo-jin caved immediately, switching his whole demeanor, scratching his head and putting on an apologetic smile. He quickly insisted he hadn't been fighting, and called them all peace-loving kids who were just messing around. Meanwhile, up on the top floor of a nearby arcade, something else was quietly brewing. Choi Yun-ho, a core member of the anti-Jangshan alliance with pink hair, muttered that it was disappointing. He couldn't help remarking that the rumors outside were apparently true. Jangshan High School had turned into a school full of spineless kids who trembled at a teacher's word. Saying that, Choi Yun-ho turned to look at Nam Jae-hee beside him, a guy with green hair, and asked what he made of it all. Nam Jae-hee, the leader of the anti-Jangshan alliance who had voluntarily dropped out of high school, was stroking a cat. But the moment he heard Choi Yun-ho's words, he lost control, clawing at his own face in a frenzy. Bright red beads of blood ran from his fingertips and dripped onto the cat's soft fur. Nam Jae-hee's voice shook with rage, saying that just hearing the name Jangshan High School made him tremble with fury. He declared through gritted teeth that they had only one goal: to destroy every last one of those Jangshan High School bastards. His eyes burned with cold, absolute resolve as he declared that they would strike tonight and drench these streets in blood, hunting down every Jangshan High School student, leaving no one standing. As the last word left his mouth, he grabbed the stray cat in his arms with a grip so hard the cat let out a small whimper. Then he raised the cat high over his head, eyes locked precisely on Lee Seo-jun below, completely unaware of what was coming. Without a moment of hesitation, he hurled the cat down toward the street below. Nam Jae-hee said this was just a simple greeting to start things off. A sudden chorus of shocked cries broke out in the crowd below as people looked up, confused about what was falling from above. I watched helplessly as the dark shape hurtled straight down toward Lee Seo-jun's head, and immediately threw myself forward, shoving him hard out of the way. When my vision cleared, I realized what had fallen wasn't anything heavy. It was a small cat. Kim Yoo-jin cried out in shock beside me. He said that from that height there was no way the cat survived the fall. I took a deep breath and gathered every bit of strength I had, then charged forward and leaped into the air, and caught the falling cat cleanly. Kim Yoo-jin stared at the cat in my arms and exclaimed in disbelief. I had actually pulled it off. I held the trembling cat close and looked up at the floor above with cold eyes. Up there, Choi Yun-ho watched me from the rooftop with genuine awe in his voice, saying my reaction speed was no joke. It was no wonder I'd taken Jangshan High School. I had real ability. Just then, the arcade owner shoved open the rooftop door, looking displeased at the sight of the two of them. He demanded to know what they thought they were doing on his rooftop, endangering people and ruining his business. He ordered them off immediately. If they really wanted to die, they could find somewhere else to do it and stop causing trouble on his property. Nam Jae-hee turned around, slowly pulling a cold metal chain from his pocket. With a dark look, he signaled Choi Yun-ho to go round up all their nearby crew first. Then Nam Jae-hee stepped forward and looped the chain around the owner's neck. His eyes grew colder as he tightened his grip, menacing the owner to mind his own business. By then, I had already memorized the faces of the two troublemakers. I set the cat down gently, thinking to myself that I had better not run into them again. Just then, Lee Seo-jun suggested they go eat. He led everyone into a restaurant nearby and ordered until the table was completely full. Lee Seo-jun warmly told everyone to help themselves. I sat to the side, frustrated and deflated, turning over in my head how things had ended up like this. All I had wanted was a quiet dinner alone with Lee Seo-jun, just the two of us. So why had all these people tagged along? Lee Seo-jun looked over at Kim Yoo-jin and the others with genuine concern, asking if anyone had been hurt. Kim Yoo-jin sat up straight and bragged about his own skill, saying something like this was nothing. But when he happened to glance my way, he instinctively shrank back, sensing that staying any longer was going to end badly for him. So he wisely made up an excuse about having somewhere to be and announced they were heading out. The younger students didn't have the same read on the room. They kept shoveling food into their mouths and mumbling that leaving all this good food behind should be a crime. The table was filled with the sound of chewing, and someone couldn't help praising how good it was, turning to Lee Seo-jun and asking if they could order 5 more servings. Lee Seo-jun smiled and nodded, his voice warm as ever, telling everyone to take their time and not choke. They could could eat as much as they wanted. After dinner, Lee Seo-jun reminded everyone to be careful on the way home. It was getting dark, and there were a lot of people around. Kim Yoo-jin and the others all agreed and disappeared in a flash. Once they were gone, I was still frowning, my frustration completely unresolved. Lee Seo-jun looked at me apologetically, saying he had promised to help me pick out reference books and things had gotten away from him. He would make it up to me with a proper meal next time. I felt deflated, but there was nothing I could do. I would just have to wait for another chance to get him alone. I looked up at him impressed, asking why he had just let those guys go. They should have gotten a proper lesson. Lee Seo-jun smiled gently and said with quiet conviction that the best way to teach someone was never through physical punishment, it was teaching them how to smile again. As long as you were willing to believe in them and give them enough time and guidance, they would eventually find their own way. Inside, I thought quietly that someone that's stubborn was never going to figure things out on their own. Lee Seo-jun's approach of pure patience and forgiveness seemed like a complete waste of effort to me. Lee Seo-jun glanced up and spotted a cafe on the corner of the street and suggested stopping in for a drink. My eyes lit up right away. I said I wanted a cocoa latte. Lee Seo-jun ruffled my hair with a smile and said my taste hadn't changed since I was little. After finishing the coffee, I sighed contentedly and said that a sweet drink after a meal was absolutely perfect. Meanwhile, Kim Yoo-jin and the others were on their way home when someone couldn't help saying they had never met a teacher like that before, one who didn't blame them and actually bought them dinner. Kim Yoo-jin looked down at the candy sitting in his palm, mind slowly drifting back to dinner. Lee Seo-jun had specifically handed him a piece of candy, saying they should eat together again sometime. Wasn't eating something good more fun than fighting? Kim Yoo-jin popped the candy into his mouth and murmured to himself that there were quite a few things about Jiangshan High School that were nothing like he'd imagined. Just then, Choi Yun-ho's voice came out of nowhere, saying they had finally shown up. Choi Yun-ho was crouched on the ground, complaining with obvious impatience that he had been waiting forever. Kim Yoo-jin frowned and looked him over, asking who Choi Yun-ho was and cracking that he looked like he'd escaped from a host bar. Seeing the guy blocking his beloved motorcycle, Kim Yoo-jin's voice hardened immediately, and he told him to get away from the bike. Choi Yun-ho let out a contemptuous scoff, saying he had absolutely no interest in something that cheap. Then he raised his foot and gave the motorcycle a hard kick, every bit of it a deliberate provocation. He smiled lightly and said what he was actually interested in was people from Jiangshan High School. Kim Yoo-jin's anger surged and he moved to get in his face, but when his eyes swept over the fuel tank of the motorcycle, he stopped dead. The cap was open. Before he could react, Choi Yun-ho casually tossed a lighter, saying he had accidentally slipped. The lighter landed near the fuel tank and ignited in an instant, and a second later the whole thing exploded with a bang. Kim Yoo-jin and the others were furious and bewildered, completely unable to figure out what Choi Yun-ho was after. At that moment, a group of black-clad figures stepped out from the shadows, lining up solidly behind Choi Yun-ho with an aura that sent a chill through the air. Choi Yun-ho raised a hand, his voice going cold, and declared that the hunt for Jiangshan High School had officially begun. Nam Jae-hee was still positioned above, looking down over everything. He said in a vicious voice that everything happening tonight was something the people of Jiangshan High School had brought on themselves. This street beneath his feet was going to be drenched in the blood, and filled with the screams of every single Jiangshan High student. He raised his hand and gave the order to start. No one was to be spared, man or woman, especially the boss of Jiangshan High School who was in the cafe. He told his crew not to go easy just because she was a girl. A few of his guys burst into the cafe, only to find it empty of anyone else. They turned on the part-time worker and demanded to know where I was. The worker trembled with fear, stuttering that they hadn't seen any purple-haired girl. When the word came back to Nam Jae-hee, his brow furrowed and his expression darkened. He cursed under his breath, wondering where I had gone. The next second I appeared directly behind him. I rolled my wrists, voice barely containing the fury building inside. I had sensed someone tailing me earlier. All I had wanted was a quiet moment alone with Lee Seo-jun, a date, and somehow I'd attracted a swarm of pests, not wanting to drag Lee Seo-jun into it. I had made up an excuse and sent him on ahead, saying I could get home safely on my own. But this guy had now interfered with my time with Lee Seo-jun twice, and that crossed a line I didn't forgive. Whoever it was, once I had them in front of me, there was only one outcome. I closed in on Nam Jae-hee one step at a time, not even bothering to hide the intent in my eyes, and identified him out loud. He was the one who had thrown the cat off the building earlier in the day. The crime of throwing a cat and the crime of ruining my date were each unforgivable on their own, and on top of that, those unsettling creepy eyes of his, that counted as another offense. I clenched my fist, knuckles cracking, and declared in a cold voice that with all of the above charges combined, the sentence was death. At the same time, Lee Seo-jun was making his way home, the unease inside him growing with every step. This road was darker than he had expected, and he couldn't stop worrying about whether I had made it home safely. He regretted listening to me and leaving on his own. He should have walked me back himself. Just then, he came across several students collapsed on the roadside, badly beaten, and rushed over immediately. After recognizing them as Jiangshan High School students, he urgently asked what had happened. The students endured the pain and said frantically that Jiangshan High School was under attack. People were hunting them down everywhere and showing absolutely no mercy. Lee Seo-jun's expression shifted in an instant. He made the call on the spot spot that the most important thing right now was to get them to the hospital. Back on my end, just as I was charging at Nam Jae-hee, he slowly and casually rattled off everything about me, my age, height, and weight, my blood type, and where I lived. He even knew I was the only daughter of the legendary wrestling champion. Then he swung the chain in his hand and came at me. I dodged sharply, cursing him in my head for digging up every last detail about me. Taking advantage of the split second he was off balance from the missed swing, I drove my fist straight at his face, throwing punches while demanding to know who he was and why he had it out for Jiangshan High School. Nam Jae-hee fought back against my assault, voice as cold as ice, with no intention of explaining anything. He worked around behind me, and in the gap between attacks, looped the chain tight around my neck. The pressure steadily increased, cutting off my air and making it impossible to breathe. He was certain I would die tonight, his voice wrapped in something bone-chilling and vicious. A strained, pained sound forced its way out of my throat as the chain dug in, feeling like my neck was about to snap. This guy was genuinely trying to kill me. Nam Jae-hee brought his face close to my ear and said in a low, sinister voice that I shouldn't feel wronged. Tonight on this street, everyone connected to Jiangshan High School was not going to escape his reach. He called it the price Jiangshan High School had to pay for its sins, a debt that had been building for a long time, and now they were going to pay it in blood. He declared that no one would escape this hunt, not even the students who had just enrolled would be spared from the reckoning. The moment he finished speaking, Nam Jae-hee tightened his grip further and told me to stop struggling and accept my death quietly. I gritted my teeth against the suffocating pain. This madman was completely beyond reason. Even if he had a grudge, this level of killing intent made no sense. I reached up and clamped both hands onto the wrist, pulling the chain, using that tiny opening to reach back and seize him by the throat. Then I wrenched my body forward in a sharp bend, using the momentum of my weight dropping to throw him into a back shoulder throw, slamming Nam Jae-hee hard into the ground and sending the chain falling away from my neck. I caught my breath, still unable to understand what Jiangshan High School had ever done to make him hate it this deeply. Just because I was from Jiangshan High School, he wanted me dead. It made absolutely no sense. I was still demanding answers when Nam Jae-hee suddenly pulled out his phone and answered a call, his voice pulling back slightly, even some of the earlier menace easing off. My fury flared hotter. This punk actually dared to take a phone call while I was questioning him. He had zero respect for me. Nam Jae-hee hung up, a faint tremor running through his body. He looked up at me, voice still cold but carrying a thread of reluctance, saying the hunt was over for today and that I was lucky. Nam Jae-hee slowly got to his feet, saying they were falling back for now. But the hunt for Jiangshan High School had only just begun. I moved to cut him off, but he had already spun and charged to the edge of the rooftop. The next second, Nam Jae-hee hurled himself off the side. I cried out in shock. Was he out of his mind? This was the 6th floor. Was jumping off at his idea of dying? But even as he left the edge, the chain in his hand whipped out and wrapped precisely around an exposed pipe outside the building. He used the flexibility of the chain and the support of the pipe to slide rapidly downward. At the last moment, he cinched the chain tight to absorb the impact and landed clean, disappearing into the darkness without looking back. I stared at the direction he had vanished, uneasy and unsettled. This guy was not someone to take lightly, hunting Jiangshan High School students without a shred of hesitation and pulling off stunts like that in the middle of the night. I needed to find him and deal with this as fast as possible. In an abandoned building somewhere in the area. After hanging up the call, Nam Jae-hee made his way back. Members of the anti-Jiangshan Alliance had already gathered there, waiting for his orders. One of the thugs kicked idly at a student curled up on the ground with a sneering grin, mocking them for squirming around like a worm, pitiful and laughable. He taunted the student for picking the wrong school. Enrolling in a dump like Jiangshan High School was why they ended up like this. The student being beaten endured the pain, cursing them through gritted teeth, beaten all over and still refusing to fully break. Seeing this, Nam Jae-hee stood up and walked over toward the thug and the student. He asked his subordinate with cold displeasure if this was what they called properly dealing with someone. Nam Jae-hee glanced down coldly at the student on the ground, then crouched down and pulled a length of wood burning red hot out of the fire. He raised it high and brought it down on the student without a moment of hesitation. The words out of his mouth were savage. He had said it before and he would say it again. The people of Jiangshan High School weren't human, they were animals. Watching Nam Jae-hee spiral out of control, the cruelty in his eyes getting worse with every second, his blows coming with less and less restraint. Choi Yun-ho stepped out of the shadows, brow furrowed, and moved to stop him. He warned Nam Jae-hee that if he kept this up, someone was going to die, and told him to cool down and stop acting on impulse. Nam Jae-hee snapped his head around to glare at him, snarling at him to shut up. He gripped the wooden rod tight, voice absolute, saying that from the moment he had decided to take revenge, he was never going to stop. Nam Jae-hee also warned everyone present to make it perfectly clear in their heads, their ultimate goal was the complete destruction of Jiangshan High School. No one was allowed to back out halfway, and no one was allowed to stand in the way of his revenge, or they would face the consequences. The next morning when I walked into school, the sight was almost unbelievable. Nearly every student was visibly injured, the campus looking less like a school and more like a field hospital. In the hallway, 2 injured students were grumbling to each each other, talking about the attackers who had appeared out of nowhere, screaming about hunting Jiangshan High School students and going at them viciously, completely low and cowardly. Lee Seo-jun stood with a tight frown, taking in all the injuries on the students passing by. He thought to himself that with this many people hurt today, and the number of absences more than doubling, this had to be connected to last night's attack. It was not something that could be ignored. I had just moved to go and say hello when he turned and walked away quickly in the opposite direction. I pressed a hand to my neck and followed, still aching and tender, every bit of it left behind by Nam Jae-hee's chain. Just outside the teacher's office, voices drifted through the door. One teacher was asking with some uncertainty whether they were really being asked to patrol the streets after work. Lee Seo-jun's voice was firm and clear. Yes, the area around the school had been unsafe recently, and to give students peace of mind while studying, he was suggesting the teachers take turns patrolling to keep them safe. Grumbling broke out after that. One person said why should they put in extra work after hours? Someone else said students getting into fights was nothing new. Another said patrolling was pointless and wouldn't change anything. One teacher even lowered their voice and told him there was no need to stir things up. Wasn't it better to just clock out peacefully? Lee Seo-jun's voice carried genuine disbelief as he asked how anyone could not see the injured students in the hallway. A passerby had been beaten badly enough to be hospitalized just the day before. How could any teacher stand by and do nothing? He paused, his voice softening slightly, and apologized for raising his voice just then. Then, Lee Seo-jun stated clearly that even if he was the only one, he would continue to patrol. More murmuring filled the office, comments about him being a new teacher who didn't need to be this stubborn and was just making trouble for himself. Lee Seo-jun said nothing more and pushed through the door, almost walking straight into me. He paused and asked what I was doing outside the office. I panicked for a second and fumbled out an excuse, then quickly changed the subject and asked if he was really going to patrol, because that road became genuinely dangerous once it got dark. His gaze was steady and sure, voice gentle but firm, as he said that protecting students was what a teacher was supposed to do. He added quietly that starting today, he would carefully check every corner of the area around the school, every dark spot, every back alley, and make sure no student was hurt again. When I got back to the classroom, there wasn't a single person in it. Obviously, they had all gathered on the rooftop. Everyone was furious, swearing that they were going to find out which school these lowlifes were from and make them pay. Yin Jing-kyu spotted the bruise on Bai Jung-su's face and teased him about whether he had gotten floored last night, joking that for someone who was my right hand, getting banged up like this was embarrassing. Bai Jung-shu pulled the lollipop out of his mouth and pushed back, insisting he had come out on top. But then he lowered his voice, saying he had actually managed to pick up some information. Nearby, Kim Yoo-jin clenched his fists hard, eyes blazing, demanding loudly to know when everyone was going to stop complaining. His friend was in the hospital. His beloved bike had been destroyed. The enemy had come to them. How could they just swallow it and not strike back? Yin Jing-kyu frowned, staying relatively calm, and asked the group whether I would even allow them to retaliate. Bai Jung-shu threw up his hands helplessly beside him, saying I wouldn't even let them smoke on school grounds. Revenge was absolutely out of the question. I was walking up just in time to catch all of that, and my eyes went involuntarily cold. Bai Jung-shu looked up and saw me, then said as if testing his own theory, "See, she's probably not going to allow it." But I spoke each word clearly and gave the order, "Find them." Bai Jung-shu asked who to find. I added the weight and said it fully. Find every last person who attacked Jiangshan High School, and take them out completely. The noise on the rooftop went dead silent for a moment, then erupted into something even louder and more alive. Kim Yoo-jin stared at me with wide, excited eyes, asking again and again if I was really giving the green light to hit back. I nodded firmly. There was no way I was going to stand by and watch them get pushed around for no reason. Everyone broke into cheers, saying I was everything a Jiangshan High School boss should be. I glanced over at them, and said coolly that only I got to hit them. Everyone immediately fell in line, calling themselves my personal punching bags, though a few voices quietly wondered if that was actually something to cheer about. Others nodded in reluctant agreement. Bai Jung-soo asked what had gotten into me. I was being unusually motivated. I told him the enemy wanted to wipe us out completely. Sitting back and doing nothing was not an option. Bai Jung-soo went on to lay out what he had found. The attackers were all dropouts. He had gone through every school nearby without finding any trace of them. So his guess was that they were a group of out-of-school thugs who had come together for some reason and were out to destroy Jiangshan High School. More concerning than their numbers was the look in their eyes, a cold, ready-to-kill kind of edge. Something off in a way that was hard to describe, as if they had slipped off the rails mentally, which was why they were throwing their fists without any hesitation or restraint. At that, I suddenly thought back to the look in Nam Jae-hee's eyes, already deep in the grip of something unhinged. So I rallied everyone and sounded the call for payback. We were going to hunt down every last attacker, beat them properly, and make them answer for what they had done. Over in the teacher's office, the picture was completely different. A few teachers were gathered around Lee Seo-jun's desk, pointing at the patrol schedule he had drawn up. Watching him dig through a drawer for patrol gear, someone clicked their tongue and muttered that he was a new teacher, with no need to push himself forward like this. Someone else asked mockingly whether he thought anyone was going to thank him for it. Another said he wasn't starring in some inspirational teacher movie, he was just being laughably naive. When it was time to clock out, one teacher called everyone over for drinks to unwind. The group left laughing and talking, until only Lee Seo-jun Seo-jun was left, still alone in the office. When I walked up to the teacher's office door, Lee Seo-jun came out just as I arrived. I held up the cola in my hand as a greeting, and asked if he was heading out to patrol right now. He took the cola with a smile and said that was exactly what he was about to do. I frowned and asked if he was really going alone. He twisted off the cap and took a sip, saying matter-of-factly that the other teachers were busy, he could handle it himself. I thought quietly to myself, the teachers here had already given up on the students. It didn't take a genius to figure out that they weren't busy at all. They had gone out for dinner together. I softened my voice and said that caring about students was a good thing, but he also needed to look out for himself. He reached out and gently ruffled my hair, started by thanking me for my concern, then said calmly that even getting hurt like last time didn't matter, because from the day he had decided to become a teacher, one thing had never changed. A student who had lost their way and was struggling, a student suffering right in front of his eyes. He would never look away. He would give everything he had to protect everyone. Then he smiled and said that if he didn't even care about his students, how could he ever become a cool teacher? I watched his profile as he spoke, thinking to myself that this person hadn't changed at all, still the same single-minded, gentle soul he had always been. He then asked if he should walk me home. I quickly shook my head, made up an excuse about having things to take care of, and told him not to bother. Out on the cultural street, Yin Jin-kyu, Choi Dong-kyun, Bai Jung-shu, and Kim Yoo-jin split into 4 groups and moved quietly through the cultural street to launch a counter hunt. At a corner of the street, a group from the enemy alliance had gathered. A shaved head thug licked his fist with a sinister laugh, declaring he was going to crack some Zhongshan High School skulls tonight, even making crude comments about going after the girls. Just then, an elderly man collecting scrap pushed his cart slowly past and politely asked them to make way. The shaved head instantly snapped, screaming at the old man for having no sense. He lunged forward and grabbed the old man roughly, shouting at him to back up, and threatening that if he wanted to stay alive he'd better not get in the way. At that moment, Kim Yoo-jin's voice rang out sharply, stopping the shaved head from hitting the old man. He demanded loudly to know what kind of tough guy picked on an elderly person. If they wanted a fight, they could bring it to him. The shaved head shoved the old man away and turned to them with a vicious grin, saying that saved them the trouble of searching. They had just walked right up. He said mockingly that after the beating they took yesterday, they still had the nerve to show their faces out here. Since they were so eager to die, he would happily send them off. At those words, the thugs charged forward yelling, screaming at them to die. Kim Yoo-jin played scared for a second, then said one word at a time, "We're not the ones being hunted. You are." By then, I had already silently appeared behind the shaved head and drove a hard punch into the back of his skull, putting him flat on the ground. Then I plowed into the middle of the group, going at everyone with fists and feet and no mercy whatsoever. A thought crossed my mind from what Bai Jung-shu had suggested yesterday. He had said the full scale of the enemy still wasn't known, and the losses from yesterday's attack had to be factored in. He had suggested gathering more intelligence first. I kicked the thug coming at me straight off his feet. Why bother with all that trouble? Now that I was here myself, not a single one of them was getting away. Kim Yoo-jin watched me work and called out with open admiration, "Senior, you're incredible." He said I had always been going on about model school behavior, so he had figured I was a tough but boring senior, but now that they were fighting on the same side, he could see she was a total powerhouse. I stood in the middle of the downed thugs and called out to everyone behind me, "Attention, all of Jiangshan High School. Effective immediately, the counter hunt is officially underway. We have one objective: clear every dangerous element on this street, and leave it the cleanest it has ever been. This isn't just for my crew, it's so Lee Seo-jun can patrol without running into any trouble." The cultural street just outside Jiangshan High School, walk a few blocks off the main road, and you reach what people called the Devil's Den. It had been the scene of countless youth crimes over the years, earning a notorious reputation nationwide. It later became a gathering spot for all the local thugs, a lawless place soaked in violence and crime. People called it the Cursed Street, a place where evil ruled. Anyone who wandered in by mistake would come out worse for wear. And now, for the first time, this place had its first patrol officer. Lee Seo-jun gripped his patrol notebook, took a deep breath, and prepared to start his rounds. He thought about how the students had been attacked somewhere around here just yesterday. For the safety of every student, he could not afford to miss even the smallest threat. He walked slowly, eyes taking in everything around him. Then suddenly a sharp voice came from nearby, a man's voice telling someone not to move. Lee Seo-jun rushed over and demanded loudly to know what was going on, but the scene he walked into made him stop cold. It was a couple being affectionate. His face turned red instantly, and he turned away with a string of awkward apologies. Privately relieved, he had been worried students might be getting hurt, but things turned out to be far calmer than expected. What Lee Seo-jun had no idea about was that all around him, a series of intense cleanup operations were unfolding at the same time. Everyone was moving under my orders in total secrecy. Kim Yoo-jin watched me take down that group of thugs without breaking a sweat, and marveled that the English teacher was incredibly lucky to be liked by someone like me. After wrapping up, he came over quietly and asked what to do with the ones who had been beaten down. I dusted off my hands and said casually to toss them somewhere out of sight. Then I pulled out my phone, called in one by one, and asked for a status update on the street cleanup. Right away, Bai Jung-shu's voice came back on the line. The thugs who had been smoking and causing trouble on the road had been dealt with, and the area was cleared. Yin Jeng-kyu followed right after with his report. The thugs who had been robbing people had been handled. Not far away, a shouting match broke out, a thug screaming at a pedestrian. Almost simultaneously, Choi Dong-hyun's voice came through the phone, reporting that the thugs trying to pick fights had been subdued with no loose ends. I spoke into the phone and told them to keep up the same pace, move quietly, clear out every stray thug still wandering the street, not one left behind, and specifically emphasized that if anyone spotted a core member of the enemy alliance, they were to report to me immediately. Those ones I would handle personally. I finished with a firm warning to everyone. Under no circumstances was Lee Seo-jun to be disturbed. Anyone who let that happen would answer for it. On the other side of the street, Lee Seo-jun was still on patrol. By now, it had stretched well into the evening. Yin Jin-kyu looked toward Lee Seo-jun in the distance, remarking that the English teacher was seriously committed. He had been going for hours without a break. Kim Yoo-jin kept his admiring gaze on me, saying I was genuinely in a class of my own. Yin Jin-kyu clicked his tongue, a little deflated. He had been expecting an all-out brawl, but the whole day had been spent mopping up scattered thugs. Not exactly thrilling. Kim Yoo-jin scratched his head and said the place was supposed to be called the Devil's Den, but apart from the enemy alliance, it really didn't feel that scary. Yin Jin-kyu gave him a look and explained that was exactly because the boss had stepped in. They were just there for cleanup. He reminded Kim Yoo-jin not to forget that this was the street right outside Zhongshan High School. The whole Devil's Den reputation was entirely the handiwork of their predecessors. He painted a vivid picture describing how 2 years back, the seniors had left behind a trail of chaos on this very street, stealing patrol cars, an explosion at a gas station, a full-scale motorcycle brawl, among other things. So many violent incidents that the school's infamy spread across the country, which was how it earned the name Devil's Den. Kim Yoo-jin listened wide-eyed, saying the golden era of Zhongshan High School really had been on another level. I stepped forward and slapped Yin Jin-kyu on the back of the head, telling him coldly to cut out the nonsense. Then I grabbed Kim Yoo-jin by the ear and demanded to know what they thought they were doing. While their senior had been working herself half to death cleaning up the street, they were standing around chatting. Kim Yoo-jin winced and quickly insisted he had been doing what I told him, keeping watch on the teacher. I tightened my grip to drive the lesson home. The correct phrase wasn't keeping watch, it was discreet protection. Learn the difference, you punk. I let go and turned serious, asking whether they still hadn't found any trace of Nam Jae-hee. I described him, the one in the enemy alliance with the scarred face and sharp, narrow features. I told them firmly that if they ever spotted him, they were not to engage under any circumstances. No matter what, they were to report to me immediately. Thinking back to how dangerous the last encounter had been, I added that he was more dangerous than anyone else on the street, and completely out of their league. I told them to keep their eyes open and call me the moment anything came up, then turned and walked ahead to deal with the next enemy alliance member. At the same time, around a corner nearby, an enemy alliance member covered in injuries was hunched over, coughing hard, and urgently calling for help on the phone in a hoarse voice. In an abandoned building somewhere, the pink-haired Choi Yun-ho picked up the call. He couldn't believe their entire crew had been wiped out by a single girl. It was completely absurd. The voice on the other end cried out frantically that she wasn't human. She had hit them with a level of ferocity that defied explanation. Choi Yun-ho frowned with irritation, dismissing it as excuses for their own incompetence. Nearby, Nam Jae-hee's eyes suddenly went dark. He immediately figured out who had struck. He pulled out the chain and said coldly that if they wanted Zhongshan High School gone for good, Gushila was the single biggest obstacle standing in the way. Then he started lashing the chain against the kidnapped Zhongshan High student, and declared with a scream that Gushila had to be eliminated first. Finally, he broke into a smile that edged on madness, declaring that from here on, he would be taking Gushila's life personally. Lee Seo-jun had been walking the patrol route for 4 hours. So far, not a single dangerous element had turned up. He pulled out his phone and realized with a start how late it had gotten. In the dark reflection of the screen, a silhouette appeared behind him. Lee Seo-jun spun around, instantly on guard. A figure reeking of alcohol slung an arm over his shoulder. It was the school's Korean literature teacher. Not far off, a few other colleagues were gathered at the entrance of a small bar. They had come out for a group dinner. The literature teacher let out a boozy belch and said vaguely that a few of them were just having a small get-together to unwind from work. He glanced at Lee Seo-jun with a hint of teasing, saying he hadn't actually expected him to go through with the patrol. He sneered that Lee Seo-jun had a bad case of good teacher syndrome, always fretting over those deadbeat troublemakers. The literature teacher said plainly that a new teacher should act like a new teacher. Learn to read the room and stop sticking your nose into things that aren't your business. The other teachers nearby quickly moved to pull the drunk literature teacher back before things got worse. Lee Seo-jun had no interest in arguing about any of this. He frowned and turned to walk away from the whole scene, but the moment he turned, his eyes landed on a group gathered not far away. It was the same gang of thugs who had been attacking students from the school. Lee Seo-jun's gaze dropped to what they were holding, and his expression went immediately serious. They were clearly school uniforms. And just as clearly, these people were not here with good intentions. Nam Jae-hee sat on his motorcycle, raising an eyebrow, and told Lee Seo-jun with cold eyes to get out of the way. He added that if he didn't want to get beaten, he had better not be in their path. The literature teacher, who had been stumbling around drunk just moments before, was sobered by the menace in the air, and instinctively stepped back. Lee Seo-jun did the opposite. He stepped forward and looked Nam Jae-hee straight in the eye, demanding he get off the bike immediately. When Nam Jae-hee didn't move, he repeated the order one word at a time, and followed it with a direct question. Why was he targeting and hurting students from the school? Nearby, Kim Yoo-jin was hiding in the shadow of an alley, phone in hand, dialing repeatedly. The most dangerous person the senior had warned about had just appeared, standing right across from the English teacher. He kept his eyes fixed on the standoff happening not far away, chest tight with dread, all while muttering over and over for his senior to please pick up. The call finally connected, and Kim Yoo-jin blurted out that something had gone wrong. I lowered my voice into the phone and told him to calm down. I let him know I was already watching everything from from high ground and told him to be ready to move any moment. Nam Jae-hee heard Lee Seo-jun's question and let out a contemptuous scoff, then suddenly reached up and snatched the cap off Lee Seo-jun's head. He turned it back on him and asked why he cared about a bunch of worthless people. Lee Seo-jun's expression darkened, his voice carrying a warning as he told Nam Jae-hee to watch his words. Caring about students was simply what a teacher was supposed to do. Nam Jae-hee cut him off, eyes filled with hostility, saying that kind of talk made him sick. He accused teachers of ignoring and neglecting students in the past, only to put on a show of concern now. He said teachers weren't something you could trust, and teachers at Zhongshan High School especially. Then Nam Jae-hee grabbed Lee Seo-jun by the collar and ordered him viciously to get lost. But Lee Seo-jun didn't back down an inch. His eyes only grew more determined. He brought up what his own teacher had once told him, that caring about students was never meddling. It was the responsibility of a teacher. Whatever was causing a student pain, whatever form it took, a teacher's job was to step in without hesitation. That was simply what teachers were there for. Nam Jae-hee's gaze went cold, his voice full of menace. Concluding that there was no point trying to reason with Lee Seo-jun, he signaled the people behind him, declaring that anyone who stood in the way of going after Zhongshan High School, teacher or otherwise, was a target. Watching from above, my chest clenched. The distance was too far, there was no way I could get there in time. Lee Seo-jun sensed the danger too, snapping to attention and bracing himself instinctively. At that exact moment, the literature teacher lurched between the two of them, swaying deliberately and slurring something about closing time at the bar. He made up an excuse that the bar was about to shut and dragged Lee Seo-jun to come along. The other teachers caught on immediately and rushed over to grab Lee Seo-jun from both sides, stumbling around like drunks and playing along, steering him away down the street. From behind Nam Jae-hee, someone sneered at the teacher's hypocrisy, putting on a big act one moment, then turning tail and running the next. The teachers hauled Lee Seo-jun around the corner onto another street, Lee Seo-jun still fighting to break free the whole way. He argued urgently that it wasn't too late to go back. They had found the very people who had been hurting the students. They couldn't just leave. They had to go back and stop them right now. The literature teacher sighed, brushing it off with a dismissive tone, joking that Lee Seo-jun wasn't drunk on alcohol. He was drunk on the fantasy of being a passionate teacher. He paused and kept going, saying that whole passionate teacher act had been out of fashion for a long time. Students these days couldn't stand teachers who couldn't mind their own business. Student problems should be left for students to sort out. The literature teacher practically pleaded with him to stop wasting the effort, saying their salary got deposited either way. He told Lee Seo-jun to let it go. Being a teacher didn't mean working yourself to death over students. You just showed up and got through the day. By the time I rushed toward where Nam Jae-hee had been, the situation had already changed. Nam Jae-hee said coldly to his crew to forget about the teachers for now. Priority was to deal with the Zhongshan High School rat first. I followed his line of sight and felt my stomach drop. Kim Yoo-jin had already been seized and was completely unable to move. Choi Yun-ho looked at the pinned down Kim Yoo-jin and asked whether to take care of him on the spot. Nam Jae-hee shook his head and said to bring him along. Then he suddenly glanced up and looked straight toward my position, gesturing for me to follow. Even without being told, I had already made up my mind. I was not letting them out of my sight. I pushed hard to keep pace with their motorbikes on foot, cursing the whole way. These lunatics were on bikes, while I had to chase them on foot. After a short while, the motorcycles vanished completely from view. I looked around in all directions, completely at a loss for where they had gone. Then I noticed a building under construction nearby, unusual, because the lights inside were still on at this hour. I went inside to find the place thick with dust, clearly abandoned for a long time. I was still wondering whether I had the right location, when I suddenly caught sight of a figure huddled not far away. It was Kim Yoo-jin, the very one who had been taken. I rushed over immediately, and the sight of him covered in injuries sent my rage surging. I crouched down and asked quietly how he was doing, but he suddenly grabbed my hand, voice urgent, telling me to run. It was all a trap. The words had barely left his mouth when blinding light flooded in from all sides. Dozens of flashlight beams fell directly on me all at once, and then a crowd poured out from the darkness surrounding us completely. Kim Yoo-jin told me between ragged breaths that this was their base. Nam Jae-hee stood at the front of the crowd, eyes fixed on me with cold precision, a bloodthirsty smile at the corner of his mouth. Then he gave the signal to his crew and told them to move. Before the words even finished, a hail of bricks came flying at me. I dodged with quick footwork and told them to go see a doctor if they were that unhinged. From somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed and suggested placing bets on who would be the first to hit me in the head. I glared at them and said coming at a girl like this was pathetic. The next second, someone came roaring in from the side on a motorcycle and slammed straight into me. I staggered and hit the ground, blood already seeping from my arm. Nam Jae-hee walked up to me one step at a time and looked down. He said I was the backbone of Zhongshan High School. Once I was gone, Zhongshan High School was finished. I wasn't about to let anyone put me down that easily. Come at me one at a time or all at once, it made no difference. Seeing this, Nam Jae-hee told his crew not to be afraid, saying even the fiercest tiger could be brought down by dozens of wolves working together. The moment he finished, another volley of bricks came hurling at me. The motorcycle rider circled back and charged at me again. I kept moving to dodge the relentless assault while looking for openings to strike back. One well-timed punch launched the motorcycle motorcycle rider off his seat. I made one thing clear: the ones dying here tonight were not going to be me. It was going to be every last one of these animals who thought human lives were disposable. If they wanted it, they could all come at once. Nam Jae-hee grinned and said he'd give me exactly that, and ordered everyone to rush in. The bricks started flying more relentlessly than ever, and the number of people closing in had grown considerably. After a prolonged fight, my strength was starting to flag and my movements had slowed. At a critical moment, Kim Yoo-jin gritted through his injuries and threw himself to my side. He forced through the pain and shoved me hard out of the danger zone. They immediately redirected their focus and moved in on Kim Yoo-jin where he had fallen. I grabbed his hand and yanked him over to me, just barely clearing the motorcycle that had been aimed straight at him. No sooner had Kim Yoo-jin steadied himself than he yelled out a warning that something was closing in from behind. I spun around fast and saw Nam Jae-hee launch off his motorcycle into the air. The chain in his hand whipped down hard toward me. In that split second, crimson blood spattered across the ground. The chain came down on Lee Seo-jun. He had somehow come charging in and thrown himself in front of me. I looked at the wounds on Lee Seo-jun, my heart aching. Nam Jae-hee stood to the side with an unreadable expression, watching in silence. Lee Seo-jun's first words were to ask if I was all right, voice full of concern. He reached up and gently touched my head. He had said he would protect them. That was his responsibility as a teacher, not to look away from a student in pain, but to step forward and give everything to protect them. That was what being a teacher truly meant. He would never be like the other teachers, who chose to look away and pretend not to see, or who stood cold and indifferent while their students suffered. A brief silence fell over everything. Nam Jae-hee stared at Lee Seo-jun and found himself drifting, without meaning to, into memory. Something from 2 years ago. Every time he and his brother walked down the cultural street, they were stopped. Jiangshan High School students would block their path with absolutely no courtesy. They would announce arrogantly that the whole street was under Jiangshan High School's control. Pay the toll or you're not getting through, and either way, you're taking a beating. Nam Jae-hee cursed them out and complained to his brother about how unfair it was. His brother gently comforted him, saying they'd been beaten for less time than usual today. That was already an improvement. Nam Jae-hee looked at his brother and sighed, telling him to stop letting himself get hurt worse just to protect him. He was always worried his brother would take an injury that wouldn't heal. His brother smiled and said protecting his little sibling was his responsibility, and promised he would always stay by Nam Jae-hee's side, no matter what. It was only later that Nam Jae-hee understood. The younger version of himself had no idea what his brother's sense of responsibility would cost him. Nam Jae-hee came back to the present, and Choi Yun-ho scoffed beside him, saying Lee Seo-jun's gesture was ridiculous. In his view, no teacher would ever genuinely put their life on the line for a student. Nam Jae-hee snapped back to himself, declaring in a cold voice that everyone was a target, teachers included, and gave the order to kill Lee Seo-jun. The moment the order landed, everyone surged toward us. The three of us were badly outnumbered, and the situation turned against us in an instant. At that critical moment, Bai Jung-soo came barreling in with a car, and sent several of them flying on impact. The enemy alliance members who had been throwing bricks from the second floor also came rushing down to back them up. Bai Jung-soo quickly reported to me that all four groups had converged here and were ready to counterattack. Yin Jeng-kyu opened by getting in their faces, telling them they had no idea what they were walking into by picking a fight with Jiangshan High School. Not one of them was leaving today. Choi Yun-ho fired back immediately, calling them trash who had come to hand themselves over. Lee Seo-jun quickly stepped up to try to calm both sides down. Yin Jeng-kyu was caught off guard seeing the English teacher here. When he caught sight of the blood on Lee Seo-jun's back, he exploded. He spun around and landed a hard hit on Choi Yun-ho, shouting that outsiders had no business touching Jiangshan High School's teacher. That was a privilege reserved for their own people. Choi Yun-ho flew into a rage too, because Yin Jeng-kyu's punch had sent his last cigarette flying. He ordered everyone to beat Jiangshan High School into the ground. Lee Seo-jun shouted for them to stop, but in the chaos, no one was listening, and the fighting only intensified. Kim Yoo-jin called out from the side that just because one arm was out of commission didn't mean he was helpless. Bai Jung-soo relayed my order. Kim Yoo-jin was to stay close to Lee Seo-jun no matter what. Not a scratch on the teacher, or I would personally deal with him. Kim Yoo-jin asked where I was, and Bai Jung-soo just said I had gone to take care of the enemy alliance's boss. At that same moment, Nam Jae-hee and I had made it to the second floor. I glanced down at the chaos below and said that way, no one would be coming up here to interfere with our fight. With that, I launched the first attack, closing in and throwing a punch that drew blood from the corner of Nam Jae-hee's mouth. I told him that touching Lee Seo-jun was the last mistake he was ever going to make. I told him that from this moment on, the one being hunted was him. Nam Jae-hee seemed to find it the most absurd thing he had ever heard. He stood up and burst out laughing. He said hearing those words from a girl at Jiangshan High School made his blood run cold with rage. Then he swung the chain and lashed it toward me. I gritted my teeth, even being grazed by it had split the skin open. Nam Jae-hee swore that today was going to be the worst day of my life since setting foot in Jiangshan High School. He was going to make me suffer until I had nothing left. He also mocked me. Did I really think one person stepping up was going to put an end to the hunt for Jiangshan High School? I snapped back that he had the word hunt in his mouth every other second. It was barely one step above being a cave dweller. But Nam Jae-hee answered with something completely unrelated, stating flatly that until Jiangshan High School was destroyed, he was not stopping. He was going to bring everyone down completely. My body was accumulating cuts and bruises and my energy was wearing thin. He seized the moment and looped the chain around my ankle, then yanked with full force. I was ripped off my feet and flung through the air. Nam Jae-hee scoffed and said every bit of resistance I put up was a complete waste. waist. He moved to cinch the chain tighter, planning to wrap it around my neck and finish things. But all it managed to add was a bit more blood, because he suddenly couldn't pull the chain any further. I had clamped my teeth down on the chain with everything I had and stopped it cold. I used the position to flip myself over and drove a kick squarely into his chin with full force. Nam Jae-hee howled in pain and cursed me as a reckless lunatic. I pushed back without missing a beat, saying I'd long since gotten used to being called that. Every time it came up, I'd ask whoever said it if they really wanted to see what a real lunatic looked like. And right now, I was about to give him a proper demonstration. I tightened my fist and threw my full weight behind the punch. One hit sent him flying, and I told him through gritted teeth not to touch anyone near me again. Nam Jae-hee grimaced in pain, cursing me and demanding to know just how far gone I was. I let my voice go cold and asked again why he was so obsessed with hunting Jiangshan High School. I wanted to know what had happened in the past. Nam Jae-hee forced himself up through the pain, screaming that he would not stop until every last person from Jiangshan High School was dead. Seeing that he kept refusing to answer the question, I let the warmth drain from my face, grabbed him by the throat and slammed him back down to the ground. I raised my voice and demanded to know what Jiangshan High School had ever done to him, that he would drag in teachers who had nothing to do with it, and that he could still find it in himself to laugh in a state like this. Nam Jae-hee responded with a cold laugh, asking if the word I had just used was innocent. His voice was soaked in hatred as he said a school that collected people like us, teachers who turned their backs on students and let them fend for themselves, and Jiangshan High School students who had made the cultural street a living nightmare. Anyone connected to Jiangshan High School was anything but innocent. His only motivation for all of this was a hatred of Jiangshan High School that went down to the bone. He mentioned that there were plenty of people downstairs who had been hurt by Jiangshan High School, someone whose life had been upended by a crash caused by the biker gang, leaving lasting damage that forced them to abandon their dream of becoming a baseball player. Someone caught in the crossfire of gang disputes who missed a major exam entirely, and there were far too many victims like that. He said flatly that all of it was the payback Jiangshan High School deserved. Then he pulled out a lighter and turned it slowly in his hand. He lit it, and hurled it hard to the side. I had no time to react and go for it. All I could do was watch helplessly as it landed directly in the oil drum beside us. A violent explosion tore through the space. I stood there, ears ringing, staring at the wall of fire in front of me. The flames churned and spread rapidly, and the thick smoke had me coughing uncontrollably. I urgently told Nam Jae-hee we had to move. This place was going to kill us both. But Nam Jae-hee held on and refused to let go under any circumstances. His eyes were full of the resolve of someone who had decided to die here alongside me. If this kept up, we would both burn to death. But Nam Jae-hee refused to budge, saying that from the day he had decided to take revenge, he had already made his peace with it. As long as he could take down the Jiangshan High School bastards, he was willing to walk into hellfire. As he spoke, Nam Jae-hee slipped into the memories of the past. He said he and his brother had once lived in a rental in the cultural street because the rent was cheap. The street had become dangerously chaotic because of Jiangshan High School students causing mayhem. Every time they walked through, they would be shaken down for money. He was penniless back then, so every single time he would end up beaten badly. But then suddenly, one day, those people started walking right past him, straight past without stopping, without so much as a glance. He couldn't figure out why. He asked if I knew the reason, why they would suddenly let him pass without doing anything. Without waiting for my answer, he kept going on his own. Every day when he came home, he would wait a long time before his brother would drag himself back, exhausted. He would look at his brother covered in sweat and ask if he had been out doing food deliveries on his bicycle again. His brother would scratch his head and smile, saying there had been more deliveries than usual today, and then pull out fried chicken he had bought and tell him to eat it while it was hot. Life back then wasn't easy, but it was manageable. With his brother by his side, he always believed that as long as they faced things together, they would find their way to a happy future someday. He said he had held on to that belief right up until, and then stopped. I had nothing to say to that, frustrated that he left the sentence unfinished. Without waiting for me to press him, he came at me without warning. But by then the fire around us was getting more violent by the second. The scorching flames were almost licking at us. I hit Nam Jae-hee hard, trying to knock him out of whatever was gripping him. But Nam Jae-hee was still completely consumed, charging at me again with red-rimmed eyes. Thick smoke was forcing its way into my nose and throat with every breath. My head was spinning, and I let out a pained grunt, but Nam Jae-hee kept pressing in, repeating over and over that he was not letting me leave this place. I pushed through the dizziness, mind racing through the options. This kind of pointless brawl was just going to drag on until one of us was dead. The fastest answer was to knock him out and drag him out. What mattered most right now was getting out of this fire. But what I hadn't counted on was that Nam Jae-hee took the punch and didn't go down. Instead, he clamped the chain around the pillar beside him with both hands, and refused to move no matter how hard I pulled. His eyes went dark and distant as he murmured that there was no way out of hell. Then he suddenly sprang forward and drove me down hard onto the scorching floor. I was furious and desperate to get free, but he had reached back and was gripping my throat. I stared up at his face so close, and I was stunned. I genuinely didn't understand the look on his face. What made even less sense was that he chose this moment of all moments to continue the story he had left unfinished. He said that back then, Jiangshan High School's people had been quiet for 2 full months. He had told his brother that if things stayed like this, maybe staying on the street wasn't so bad after all. It was good that the Jiangshan High School crowd had settled down, but his brother was pushing himself harder than ever, not only always looking exhausted but actively taking on extra work wherever he could. Watching his brother run himself ragged, he told him to hand the work over to himself, to go rest for a while and sleep properly. But the words had barely left his mouth when voices from Jiangshan Jiangshan High School rang out through the window. That group was demanding their drinking money, calling for their ATM to show up. They said outright that his brother was Jiangshan High School's personal cash machine. It was only then that everything fell into place. His brother had been doing all of that to keep him from being targeted on the street, not just sacrificing sleep to work more, but handing over every single bit of hard-earned money to those thugs. His brother went pale and stumbled out that he would get the money right away. He couldn't stand the thought of his brother handing that money over, so he grabbed his brother's arm and shouted out the window that they weren't giving them a single one, they could get lost. But those people just laughed and said that if no money came, they'd be annoyed, seeing as the price of soju had gone up. And with that, they smashed the window and came inside. They ransacked the place and took everything of any value. Nam Jae-hee cursed Jiangshan High School. Their behavior was getting worse by the day. Not even their one small refuge was off limits. They sat on the floor drinking and laughing, declaring the two of them their permanent ATM, saying they'd be back regularly for meals, trampling every shred of their dignity. Nam Jae-hee felt stifled and furious, unable to understand what he and his brother had ever done wrong, to deserve this treatment, to be forced to endure this humiliation. Acting on impulse, Nam Jae-hee launched a surprise attack on them from behind, but he was no match for them at all. Within seconds, he was pinned down and being beaten. He gritted his teeth through the pain and cursed them under his breath, struggling to hold himself up while screaming at them that Jiangshan High School was a cancer on the street. But the response was nothing but contempt. They said they didn't need a reason to bully the weak. They did it because they could. One of them raged at Nam Jae-hee for having the nerve to hit him from behind. In his view, Jiangshan High School people had long memories, and they always came back 10 times harder. Pushed over the edge, he threw a gas canister at them, and then a violent explosion ripped through the entire room. They scrambled in a panic, shouting that the fire was too big and they had to go, saying if they got caught for this it was at least a level 10 punishment. One of them hesitated about whether to do anything for the Nam brothers, but another told them to let them fend for themselves. Nam Jae-hee stared at the fire that erupted and spread in an instant, his mind completely blank, his body locked up beyond his control, and for a moment he found himself thinking that maybe dying there wasn't so bad. Then his brother came rushing over and pulled him up, telling him to hold on just a little longer, promising to get them both out. But the fire was raging in every direction, and the flames had cut off every exit. The two of them were trapped with no way out. Nam Jae-hee looked at the exits swallowed by fire and asked his brother frantically what they were going to do. As far as he could see, there was nothing left but to burn to death here. But his brother suddenly looked at him with eyes full of certainty, and said with complete conviction, "Leave it to me." As an older brother, he would protect his sibling. He told Nam Jae-hee to trust him and not give up. Then without another word, his brother wrapped his arms tightly around him, and jumped down to the floor below, using his own body as a shield to protect Nam Jae-hee all the way down. As Nam Jae-hee reached this part of the story, his voice was thick with pain and hatred he couldn't hide. Thanks to his brother throwing himself over him, he had made it out alive, but his brother's injuries were critical. From that day on, his brother had never regained consciousness, and to this day had not opened his eyes. He said all of it was the fault of Jiangshan High School. Even if he beat down every last thug who had set that fire, his brother still wouldn't wake up, so he had made up his mind. He was going to destroy Jiangshan High School, make sure every last one of them could never hurt anyone again, and take full revenge on Jiangshan High School for destroying both of their lives. A drop of something cold fell on my face. I looked up and realized it was a tear that Nam Jae-hee had been fighting back, finally falling. I stopped letting him hold me down, turned the grip around and locked him firmly in place. I told him I understood everything now, and that I fully understood where his hatred came from. I apologized to him with sincerity, even though I had never known that Jiangshan High School had done something that terrible in the past. But things were different now. Jiangshan High School today was slowly changing. Nam Jae-hee let out a cold snort and told me to spare him the empty words. He had seen plenty of Jiangshan High School people during all of this. None of them showed any sign of changing, so Nam Jae-hee was certain that Jiangshan High School's ways would never truly stop. Just then, the wall cracked with a violent sound. The fire surged closer, a wave of scorching air hitting us from all sides, danger everywhere. I reacted instantly, pulling Nam Jae-hee toward me, just barely clearing the chunks of debris that collapsed from overhead, a narrow escape. I held him steady as he stumbled, and told him earnestly that I wasn't saying empty words. I made him a sincere promise that I would never let Jiangshan High School go back to what it was. I would give everything I had to change what Jiangshan High School was. Nam Jae-hee was filled with doubt. He shook my hand off and pulled back, demanding to know what I possibly thought I could do to change people who were beyond saving. He brought up how even after being beaten, those people had shown no remorse, only threats, saying that anyone who crossed Jiangshan High School would pay for it, and that they would make sure the two brothers never saw peace again. They had even mockingly said his brother was nothing but a cripple after the fall from the top floor. Every word was drenched in malice, each one cutting into Nam Jae-hee. In his eyes, Jiangshan High School was rotten to the core. If this root wasn't pulled out completely, the nightmare would keep coming back. So after everything he had been through, he would never trust anyone again easily. I looked at the wariness in his face and said softly that I understood why he couldn't believe it. If I were in his situation, I wouldn't let my guard down easily either, but I meant every word. The words weren't even finished when the situation shifted again. Nam Jae-hee suddenly lunged forward and threw me down hard onto the ground with tremendous force, eyes red-rimmed, voice violent, saying he had no reason reason to keep listening to me, telling me to shut up and die. I pushed myself up from the scalding floor without saying anything else, and simply brought up his brother. I asked him what would happen to his brother, still in a coma, if he died here. Those words hit instantly. The hands gripping my throat jerked to a stop. His eyes lost focus. His brother's gentle face surfaced in his mind immediately, along with all those warm and quiet words that had carried him through the years. The obsession that had been rooted so deeply in Nam Jae-hee seemed to loosen just slightly in that moment. I caught the change in his expression, and took the opening to speak quietly, telling him to think clearly. I knew he hated Jiangshan High School with everything he had, but throwing his life away for revenge like this was wrong in itself. I asked him to trust me once, give both of us a chance, because I wasn't the only one who wanted to change Jiangshan High School. Nam Jae-hee stared at me, his expression impossible to read. Then he let out a cold laugh and said the idea of me changing Jiangshan High School was a joke. Those people were never going to change, and even if they did, it was already too late for it to matter. Before the words were finished, Nam Jae-hee's vision went dark from taking in too much smoke. He dropped straight to the ground, body completely drained, unable to get back up, even at the edge of unconsciousness. His lips were still moving, murmuring about the hunt against Jiangshan High School, deeply unwilling for this revenge to end here. Half finished. Another violent explosion ripped through the air. The fire surged even stronger in an instant, consuming everything around it. The people who had been fighting below had already fled to safety outside. Choi Yun-ho stood in the distance cursing, bewildered by how the fire had suddenly grown this fierce. Everyone searched frantically but couldn't find any trace of me. Bai Jungshu was desperate to charge back in to get me, but Kim Yoo-jin threw his arms around him and refused to let go. Kim Yoo-jin told him sharply that running into the fire right now was suicide. It would accomplish nothing. Bai Jungshu snarled through gritted teeth, grabbing Choi Yun-ho by the collar and screaming at them for playing games with human lives. Choi Yun-ho was alarmed too, struggling to get free and insisting that this wasn't what they had intended. They'd only wanted to teach Jiangshan High School a lesson. They'd never meant for anyone to die. And Lee Seo-jun stared at the raging fire in front of him, eyes fixed and unmoving. There was no way he could just stand here and watch me and Nam Jae-hee burn.